Hello, people of the internet. I am Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and welcome to another episode of Fully Endorsed. I am, of course, your host, as always. However, for this time around, we have ourselves our very first guest on the podcast. Of course, with me, as always, it is the one and only Dylan McCandless, aka Super DM64.
I think I'm the one and the only. There might be another Dylan McCandless in the world. I don't know.
Perhaps, but there's none other quite like you. And for introducing our guest for tonight, it is another person who I believe should at least be the one and only Mr. Bill Worcester, aka Zazubaar.
First of all, I'm not. My dad and I have the same name.
Shit.
Aren't you
Oh,
Bill?
shit, Andres.
Yeah.
Oh, shit.
What?
You fucked up.
What?
He's not the only one.
What happened?
That, and also, Dylan, I know you're not. Because like, whenever I've had to, like, put your name on shit,
Yeah.
I've always, like, double-checked the spelling on Facebook, and there's a million Dylan McCandlesses. None of them have the same spelling of the names.
Okay, fine, all right? There's only one Super DM64 and one Zazubaar. You happy now?
That, I guess. I've never checked on the Zazubaar thing if that name has ever been. I think there's actually some
well-known African country, Zanzibar. That's the closest I know of.
That's also the subject of a great Billy Joel song that I love and will play right now if I have the proclivity, but I won't.
Also, we'd probably be copyrighted and have our video taken down. Anyways, we're here to talk about King of Skull Island. God damn it! And so this is the subject of today's video. Bill recommended us to read the book or listen to the audiobook. In the past, I've read the comic before, but this is my first time really reading or experiencing the story the way it was meant to be.
The comic is also really, really bad, based on what I've seen from it. So fuck that comic.
It doesn't do any
This was your first experience with it.
Yeah, this is my first experience with the story. So, as people may or may not have known, there are quite a number of Skull Island related King Kong projects that attempted to delve into the world of Kong, be it whether or not it's related to the original 1933 film. And so to start things off, I wanted to give Bill the chance to kind of take us through a brief history, a brief journey through all these projects, because it can get quite confusing when you're trying to find Kong King of Skull Island when there's so many other stuff out there with the word Skull Island in the title.
That may be why it has been lost to so many fans, you know? That's why so many people, even you guys who are, fairly comparable Kong fans to myself, you guys, you had some exposure to it, but you never tracked down the original book like I did. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just because there was so much of this, like, stuff with Skull Island branded on it, especially when this came out. I was under the impression that Kong King of Skull Island was much older, from like the early 90s or something. But upon doing research for this and checking my hard copy, it's from October of 2004. And that being said, it is really the first thing of all these projects, all these Kong things with the name Skull Island on them, to flesh out the world, really. Everything with Kong's name on it before this, be it comics, cartoons, any kind of adaptation, you even look at like the Toho stuff, they never ever flesh out the world of the original movie. It's always a readaptation, or it's retelling the original story, or it's doing something completely different, like you have with the Toho Kongs and with every other comic book version of Kong before that. Marion C. Cooper okayed a couple of comics throughout like the 70s and up till the 90s, but none of them are anything other than an adaptation of the original story or something completely different, like I said before, until you get to Joe DeVito's book in October of 2004, which is the only one of these things, and all of his work that comes along after this has this distinction as well of being okay by Marion C. Cooper's estate. His family were like, we like this idea, please do it. You have our okay.
Right, and the when it comes to the legalities surrounding the character of King Kong, that is also quite a very complicated web of complications, I guess. So, I guess to
sure, we've discussed this before on Bill's channel. The rights of Kong there's a long history of.
Right.
Yeah, I should have probably started with that.
There's like the movie rights.
That's another reason why this has probably been so kind of lost. People talk about it, but like again, reading the hard copy has been kind of lost to time because it's hard to re-release it.
Like, I understand there's like there's the rights to the book character version of Kong, and there's the rights to the movie version of Kong, and there's like the rights to the character of Kong. And as far as I know, from what you're telling me, this was like the what was it, the family of the original filmmaker.
So Marion C. Cooper, who is
Cooper estate,
really the creator of King Kong, he came up with the original idea with Ernest Schoedsack and Edgar Wallace and many other people.
From what I understand, the Cooper estate, they have the rights to the book version of Kong. Is that right? Delos
D.W. Lovelace's novelization, which came out before the movie in 1932, which was the trend of novelizations back then. You know, people don't remember that now, but like that was what you used to do to get people hyped for a movie, was to release the book first.
Right. And then say that the movie is an adaptation of said book.
Yes and no. Because it's more like this is an adaptation of... Because Lovelace was writing a book based on a screenplay that was being written. You know, they were all working off the same rough draft of a story. Mm-hmm. And that's why there's a lot of difference.
The most comparable thing that I've come across is 2001: A Space Odyssey, in which Stanley Kubrick got together with the famous science fiction novelist whose name I'm blanking on at this exact second.
Arthur C. Clarke?
Yes. I believe it was Arthur C. Clarke, and they came up with the story.
I pulled that out of the lexicon of my brain.
They came up with the story together, and then they went off and wrote their separate versions, and so that's why the book and the movie are very similar, but also very different. They were created simultaneously.
Yeah, it's a very similar situation with Lovelace's novelization. It's a lot closer because just so many of the major frameworks of the narrative were in place before the movie really got going. But a lot of the action is different. And so that being said, that version of the story is what Cooper's estate still has the rights to. And that means that, like, the name King Kong in print, they have the license to that. It's very confusing. That's why, like, the new Kong movies can't be called King Kong, because that's not what they have the rights to. They have the rights to.
Doesn't Universal have the rights to the name King Kong?
I don't know. So, whoever's doing the Broadway show right now, and that's almost over soon. They're using it. And I don't know if they're in line with Cooper's estate or not. I guess they have to be, because they're also adapting like the original novel. So I would assume that Marion C. Cooper's estate are definitely involved with them. But Cooper's estate has nothing to do with the new Skull Island movies and with the MonsterVerse. That's the movie rights to Kong.
Right. So that's like Cooper estate that had to okay the Planet of the Apes crossover.
Well, it was, and because he has Marion C. Cooper's estate's blessing, it was kind of like one and the same. That was they got Joe DeVito to okay that.
Mm-hmm. Right? Didn't Joe DeVito also do the King Kong and Tarzan thing?
He did the cover for it, but that's not even like I think that's just a fan pastiche. I don't think that's even an officially released thing.
Okay.
Okay.
I could be, because that was supposed to be a Dark Horse comic in the 90s. That's actually part of how this got off the ground. In the early 90s, Dark Horse, they did Godzilla, they did Gamera, they were doing a bunch of monster comics. That's how they were making their mark on the industry, was tapping into that niche. And they wanted to do Kong, and they were really close to getting a deal on it, but back then the rights were even more askew. And they just could not make it happen.
Right,
and you come to
De Laurentiis days, or
this is during like the Universal trying to get Peter Jackson to do a version in the 90s days. So again,
the first Peter Jackson version that never happened. Yeah,
it was a real mess at that time, because the 05 version of Kong is a remake of the 33 movie.
Right.
It doesn't fuck with it's got Lumpy as well. But I don't know how much of the book they were allowed to use. I guess they were allowed to take some of the names from it. So I don't know how that works. But anyway, we were going to try and make this concise.
But there was the book.
Point being, Joe DeVito, the artist, who really wanted that Kong comic series in the 90s to happen, lifelong fan of the character, was the first one to go to Cooper's estate and go, look, I have all these ideas. I've got a friend who's willing to write the story. Do we have your blessing to use the original novelization as a bouncing off point to flesh out Kong's world? And they did it. And Dark Horse ended up putting the print release together. It's of course not fully illustrated. Andres, what's the word you had for it last night?
Okay, it's kind of reminded me of something akin to a Japanese light novel, where it is like a pretty small book that's like the first in a series of books with some illustrations sprinkled throughout the book to give you a sense of what these characters look like and what's happening, what's going on.
It's not a comic. It's almost like an adult picture storybook. That's the best way I can think
kind of like
it.
those like illustrated classics.
It's like a children's book, but on a higher reading level.
Definitely,
it's a picture book with more words,
pulpy.
More words, less pictures.
Yeah, it's a little pulpy in that sense, I guess you could say as well. So this is the first thing to really get this going, but because Kong 05 was well into production at this point, you also have Universal, who are doing their whole other thing, fleshing out their whole other world of Kong. And you have a lot of stuff that we grew up with, like that special feature on the Kong DVD, Skull Island and Natural History, which is really awesome. I rewatched it to kind of prep for this. And, watching that, as a kid, I always knew I wanted something like this book. So I wish I would have read it like closer to when it came out. So you have that, but then they did a bunch of other books along with 05 to flesh out the world. They did a bunch of children's books. We're not going to talk about those. But the major one that they did that gets confused a lot with this book, with Kong, King of Skull Island, is it's Island of the Skull. I can never remember exactly what it's called. It came out in October of 2005. So because it came out exactly a year later, I think it gets often confused with they get confused with each other. But Kong Island of the Skull, again, in continuity with 05. Haven't read it myself. Read a summary to get prepared for this. It's very different in terms of its focus from Joe DeVito stuff, because it's not so much about fleshing out Skull Island's history as it is about fleshing out Skull Island like 5 years before Carl Denham lands there, like essentially what the state of it was like right before the Venture came. You know what I mean? So you get to see like the guy who wrote the map that Carl uses. And that's pretty much it. And then they establish as well like what Carl and Anne were doing before they met up. It doesn't sound great in my opinion, but definitely something I might take a look at if I ever have time. So again, that's October of 2005.
Yeah.
The same month, Joe DeVito and Brad Strickland, who wrote Kong, King of Skull Island a year earlier, also put out Marion C. Cooper's King Kong, which is a rewrite of Lovelace's novelization from 32. So this also adds to the confusion, because you have this book, which essentially is the same thing. It's Lovelace's novelization, with a few added bits of characterization and a few added bits of details to make it line up better with Kong, King of Skull Island.
I'm also assuming
but otherwise I'm
also assuming they may have taken out some of the racism. I'm not saying that maybe there was any racism
the
in there.
novelization is actually a lot more racist than the movie is. There's like a lot more talk of like, those blacks, they better stop it. Like there's lines like that in the book, and it's like, oh yeah, that's definitely taken out. Right.
I
think they replaced. It's funny though. It's like word for word taken out, just like bastards. So it's like I know exactly where it's supposed to be. So I'm just telling you, like it's pretty much the same. A lot of the descriptions are the same. But obviously they have a love and appreciation for Lovelace's novelization, which I do too. When 05 came out, I read it and I was like, wow, this is great and very different from the movie. And it developed an appreciation for it. And then I felt the same way about Brad Strickland and Joe DeVito's rewrite of that novelization when I listened to the audiobook of that just a couple of years ago, when I first listened to the audiobook for Kong, King of Skull Island, which you guys listened to for this. Yeah. And I fell in love with that as well. So again, all of that adds to the confusion, and then it only gets more confusing in recent years, because now we've got Kong Skull Island,
which is really funny because
we finally have a movie.
Yeah.
We have a movie that finally puts that in there. We've never done that.
From what I understand, Kong Skull Island started life as an adaptation of Kong, King of Skull Island, before some legal...
Because Warner Brothers has
Yeah.
the rights to 33. You guys know that, right? They
No,
still
I
do.
didn't
And
know
that's,
that. I thought that was...
yeah, they have, like, they release the DVDs. Universal does not have the rights to 33.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
what I've never really understood Universal's deal. They essentially like forced their way into getting the rights to Kong based on everything that I've learned about what happened in the 70s. They essentially like browbeat the courts into giving them the rights to Kong, you know?
Yeah. At one time, I was very researched on this topic, and now I don't remember most of it. But
well, yeah, for the week of Kong, we did, you know, we both pretty much read up on your big book. But yeah, again, but I think it's pretty much a universal browbeat. Cooper's estate and the rights, and you know, Warner Brothers rights holders who had the rights to 33 into letting them do it. Anyway. Before 05 went into production, like when the first Peter Jackson version was in production. So you have all kinds of stuff now with the new Skull Island movie that makes it even more confusing. You know, you have the Skull Island, The Birth of Kong, which is a direct prequel to the movie, and it's essentially like Kong, King of Skull Island, but shorter and, you know, obviously very different because it's the movie Skull Island and the MonsterVerse. Definitely not bad. I enjoyed reading it, but the emotional impact of some of Kong's origin, I think, is a lot better handled than King of Skull Island. But we're not.
And there was another thing.
I did notice while listening to this audiobook, I did notice a lot of similarities to
like
to
I
Kong
said,
Skull Island. Also to 05, which was accidental because they were being made around the same time, as it turns out. But really, Kong Skull Island, you can tell, took a lot of inspiration from various aspects of this. I mean, you know, there's the scene where you find the dead skeletons of Kong's parents, and they never come out and tell you that those are Kong's parents, but it's sort of implied, you know. And then there's the whole relationship with the skull crawlers and the big one, which is similar to what's going on in this book. A lot of stuff like that.
That's why Skull Island just works so well for me, because it's just such a grab bag of all like the best aspects of every version of King Kong, and that's one of the things that I think makes that movie so entertaining.
There was also another thing. I think it was called like Kong of Skull Island.
So that's the recent comic that Boom has been doing that led into the Planet of the Apes crossover, and that is in Joe DeVito's world. So that's in continuity with Lovelace's novel and with King of Skull Island.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, with all of DeVito's stuff.
All right.
I haven't read the full series. Yeah. I'm going to though, because I really like the Planet of the Apes crossover. Like I've read it. I read it at once online and I didn't really care for it, and then I bought it and read it again. And I was like, oh no, this is actually pretty brilliant. And I felt the same way about the Of Skull Island series when it first came out around the time that, you know, the Skull Island movie did. I was pretty much like, and I should definitely go back to it.
And there was also I was gonna say there was also one more thing which Joe DeVito did, which was recently, it was recently crowdfunded on Kickstarter. I think it was called King Kong of Skull Island, which I believe was sort of like,
which is emphasizing that he can use that name in print. Nobody else can.
I'm assuming that in that case he is able to. Oh, I'm assuming that King Kong of Skull Island is like an art book or like a textbook of the history. I think it's like a mix. I think it's like a mix of what you said before of it being a strict art book, and what King of Skull Island, the original print book, was, where it's got some prose passages in it. But I think it's probably a lot more art and a lot less prose. That's what I would guess based on what I've seen from it. I would definitely like to get my hands on it.
I just wish that he would call it something else. There are too many damn projects at this point that have Kong and Skull Island all mixed into their title.
And King.
Yeah, no, he has to know that it's confusing.
Yeah. I don't mind the Kong of Skull Island comic being called that, just because we've never had a comic called that. So it, you know, with Skull Island, The Birth of Kong, obviously it gets a little muddled, but that's another example of things being made at the same time and it's just too late, you know? And they're also trying to capitalize on that movie success. So they're also they want people to get confused. You know,
right.
The only other thing I'll mention
King
here,
King of the Lost World all over again from
Asylum. Oh yeah, we should mention that too. God, that's a nostalgic romp from my youth. Terrible film as well. I'll mention the King Kong '05 novelization as well, partially just because I have a lot of nostalgia for it, but also because it just adds to the confusion. You know, it came out around the same time as Strickland and DeVito's rewrite of the Lovelace novel.
Oh God!
And so, you know, it just really adds to the confusion.
We also can't forget my favorite version of the story, which is, of course, Peter Jackson presents Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie.
Totally. By the way, that novelization of '05 is great, and like the game, radically different from the film. A lot more detail about the world of Skull Island in that you can get the ancillary material.
Can you read the book in less time than it takes to watch the movie? Because
no, it's a beefy read. It took me over a year to get through it. You know, I was a slow reader as a youth, and it took me a long time to get through it. But I did because I liked it a lot. But it was a fat book. Like, it was like 500 pages, if not more.
Oh.
Yeah, it was like I think because it was Peter Jackson making it, Lord of the Rings guy, they were like, oh, well, we can make this like a Lord of the Rings book and people will read it. And we did. So who's the idiots in that situation? So that's pretty much the history. That's pretty much laying out everything called Kong of Skull Island on Front Street here. And that's really to say that this was the first and major thing to go, Skull Island is an interesting world outside of just being a place that has dinosaurs and King Kong on it. There's obviously a history there that must have happened, and I would like to be the person to tell it or expose it to the world at all. It would be interesting to explore. And I have to say, not only is this the first, it's the best. And
still the definitive story of Skull Island.
Without a doubt.
The definitive Kong prequel story.
And not only that, it just finds the best method of doing it in terms of point of view. Because I think the problem that the comic has, the recent one that Joe DeVito and his team tried to put together, was that you go into it not knowing who the fuck anybody is, not knowing what part of the history you're at. You're like, okay, well, obviously we're early, but I don't know exactly what's going on. So it just felt very jarring and like a lot to handle. But you go to this, and it's such a wonderful gradual build into the madness that becomes this Skull Island that you know, that again, when you watch the movie, you kind of just go, well, it's a weird dinosaur world. But the real implications of it are so well explored in this and taken to their absolute furthest extremes, and I love that. There's definitely an attempt to make it feel real, but it doesn't feel like it's trying to be realistic. You guys know what I mean? Like, it's trying to make it feel like a real world, like a real fantasy world. But there isn't this attempt to go, well, we're going to scale everything down. Like a 76 Skull Island, you know? As much as I enjoy that movie.
It makes it feel real in like a literary sense, like the same way that when you read, in the same way that when you read Lord of the Rings, the Middle Earth feels real, or you buy into the Planet of the Apes when you read the Planet of the Apes. It's about fleshing it out and explaining the ins and outs of the world in such a way that it becomes more believable.
Things that you would never think to wonder about. Like, did you ever wonder about why Kong was in Skull Mountain and like how he got his domain over that? Like, never. But that chapter in the book is one of my favorites. When he goes in there and he clears out the Death Runners.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like
where
the wall even came from and how it managed to stay there all this time.
Kong's effect on the wall after he broke through it. Never would have considered that being a thing.
Andres, let me straighten you out on a few points. This wall is an ancient ruin.
Yes.
On the island. It's uninhabited.
I hate to just spoil this thing outright, but you guys usually do that anyway, right?
We do that, yeah. Spoil away.
Cool. You guys, I should just say, the title, it's in the title. I fully endorse this.
Yes.
But before we get into more details, what did you guys think about it for your first time? That's what I'm really more interested in knowing. I love this, obviously, so you guys tell me.
I would say that
really the first thing to do in an episode is get the reaction of the other person. So I guess we'll go around table. Andres, do you want to go first, or should I go first? I feel like putting him in.
I would say that it was a very enjoyable read. I had a lot of anticipation when it comes to reading this, and I was hoping that it would live up to said expectations, especially after how much Bill hyped it up over the years. But yeah, I would say it definitely lived up to the expectations and set forth by me. It's like I had previously read the book, the comic, and I enjoyed the comic for what it was at the time. But this, once I read this, I was like, oh, this. I was missing out on so much just by reading the comic alone. The comic does not do this book justice at all whatsoever. I enjoyed a lot of the detail and the lore given to Kong, Skull Island, and the inhabitants. And I feel like the main purpose, it came across to me like the main purpose of this story was to give, this may sound like a weird word to use, but I guess like give credibility or give some sort of dignity to the inhabitants of Skull Island, as opposed to making them the stereotypical ooga booga type of natives, quote unquote savage natives that was popular to depict during the 1930s. And so I feel like this does justice to that sort of native archetype and fleshes
but it
them
also
out.
doesn't like overly PC it either, right?
No. It's
because
still like,
it shows the real side of like, oh no, they can be like that,
right?
And they got like that, but there is another side to them.
Right,
100% agree with you.
I
feel the same way.
It feels like a fully fleshed out civilization where there's a rise, there's a fall, they had highs and lows. They made many accomplishments as well as many mistakes. And that's what really made this so much fascinating to read about. And at the same time, it's really interesting to see like a post-Kong world, both in New York and in Skull Island.
Again, that's why I think the point of view was so smart to start after 33 and go, well, first of all, what does it look like 20 years later? Do people even believe in it anymore? And I love the idea of that being covered up. That's never been the idea in any other Kong thing that I've experienced anywhere, where they like cover up what happened in 33. But I just think that makes a lot of sense. Like you would, because you could, because it was 1933. And how many people really were reliable enough and survived to talk about it,
I mean, 9/11 happened in 2001, and there are people who think it was fake. So King Kong would definitely be in question.
Yeah. So I love that side. But I'm sorry I jumped on you, Andres. You keep going.
Clearly, the government melted the steel beams within the animatronic Kong suit.
Yes, it's obviously
great.
Utilizing jet fuel that didn't exist yet in 1933.
Yeah. Anyways, what did you think about the book, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is something that's been on my radar for a while, just because I've been friends with Bill for nearly 10 years. So this is something that I was gonna get around to. I did listen to a little bit of it in the car during one of the G-Fest trips, but we didn't get in very far. And so, yeah, I'd like to echo most of what Andre said. I think it was really good. I enjoyed it a lot. It definitely filled out that world quite a bit. I have some minor gripes that we can get to in a little while. But overall, I think this was a really good book, and I would definitely recommend others to seek it out.
If you're somebody who's a kaiju fan, a giant monster fan, and has wanted something like what the Star Wars expanded universe has for that universe, for a giant monsters lore, this is the best thing that we have of that right now. I think I would love something like that for something like this for Godzilla and his backstory. But right now, this is the best thing we have that like fills out a giant monsters lore and makes it feel like it makes sense, and it's all interesting. And I never really thought like I wanted to know what Kong's childhood was. That's another thing that this makes so interesting. And again, I never really would have thought to have seen, like cared to have seen, until I read it and saw it dramatized this way. So yeah, I just think there's so many different things like that.
When you mentioned kaiju, you wish you saw this with Godzilla. I was going to be like, oh, there is Godzilla Awakening, but then you said you wanted to see it interesting. I was like, oh wait.
Yeah. Well, that's also like
and makes sense. And I was like, oh.
That also is so much more about the Shinomura than it is about Godzilla. So it's hard to even say. But yeah, but especially because I would love something that because again, part of the beauty of this is that it's not tied to a new movie that came out. You know, this isn't tied to '05. This isn't tied to the new Skull Island. It got time to breathe and develop in a fan's mind, and it gets to wholly work within the world of the original story and fill out all the nostalgia and the classical moments of that. They do a moment in this where Kong goes through the swamp from 33 and he messes with the sauropod-esque creature that's kind of similar to what attacked the raft in 33. Like, again, little things like that you don't expect to work, and then in context they just do. It's just so cool. But what did you guys think about the framing device of the storyteller and her as a character? Did you guys think that the mystery of the story she was telling and how it played into what was going on in the present day was well fleshed out? Did it all make sense? How did you guys feel about that?
I thought it was kind of strange to kind of hide the fact that she was a Shira, or, you know, well, I'm going by the pronunciation from the audiobook, even though I know that's not the case. That's the one that sounds the best, though, so I think it's okay to stick with them. Okay, so yeah, I know, like, I thought it was kind of pointless, really, to kind of hide the fact that the storyteller was Ashira, the main character of the story she was telling the whole time. Only because it's like...
It wasn't much of a mystery, was it?
No, yeah, it's like, gee, who could this old lady be who could have possibly have known everything that happened? Like, they tried to throw in a red herring where Vincent Denham was wondering, is she the same storyteller from within the story she's telling? Because that would make her, like, really, really old. But it's like, really?
And she is still really, really old when you find out everything at the end. You know, she's older than, you know, she's outlived most of her children. Oh, no, all of them, actually. And I'm fine with that because it's because she lives on Skull Island, you know.
Yeah, she's probably eating her, I don't know, a lot of very healthy natural lifestyle, getting plenty of exercise.
Oh, I have so much stuff to tell you guys about from the back of this book that you guys missed out on, but we'll talk about it at the end because it'll be fun for the audience too, to just kind of get your guys' like raw reactions to some of the creatures that were added into this.
I did like the line where she's like, "I'm old enough to be your mother as well, Jack Driscoll."
Oh, I love that too. How'd you guys? So first, before I jump on, continue.
I do want to say, like, I thought, like, really, Vince, you couldn't you thought that she was, you couldn't have thought, like, gee, who else could she be if not the original storyteller? Like, clearly, it just clicked in my mind. It's like, that's Ashira right there. And,
me too.
And he was like, "What happened to Ashira? Who are you?" It's like, come on, man, don't have her spell it out to you.
Yeah, this was one of those minor gripes that I mentioned before. The main character is supposed to be a scientist, but he's really dumb. Like, it takes him a long time to catch on to pretty much everything in the story.
He's not that brilliant of a scientist.
It's not. He's not.
To be fair, you guys have to remember he was being poisoned while
True.
While under the influence of all their shit in a dark cave. But at least in terms of that, like, it's pretty obvious. It's not, what?
Even after they stop poisoning him, though, he just didn't figure it out until they go to the old city. And I'm like, dude, like, put 2 and 2 together here.
Yeah. No, on that point, I 100% agree that it comes across as like, well, I knew the whole time, so this isn't really much of a reveal. Although, because of the way the story is told, if they had revealed that she wasn't Ashira, I think that, you know, like, that would have made just as much sense, and then that would have been a red herring as well. So I think it was more of like a moment of, oh no, you know, what you've been thinking since the beginning is the truth. There is no other explanation. I just think it was a mistake to make it a mystery the whole time. I can't argue that.
She even starts off by saying, "My story weaves through the whole history of the island. Let me tell it to you." And then she immediately starts off with, like, "So there was this chick Ashira," and I'm like, "It's you. You're Ashira. That's you. That's you. That's younger you right now, going on an event like that. That's you."
That being said, they do also kind of explain it where it's like kind of a Star Wars-y thing where it's like she describes it as like, I was Ashira, I'm not Ashira now, I am the storyteller. Like, once she took on that identity, she stopped being Ashira. That's the way she kind
told
of
him was true from a certain point.
Obi-Wan Kenobi point of thing. Yeah, that's exactly how it came across to me. So that's why I don't see it as an issue, but it's also at the same time not an effective mystery.
Also,
it's not an issue for, like, the plot. It's an issue for the main character being bought as like this brilliant scientist.
He's not a detective, and he's a paleontologist. So, I definitely see your point.
Also, is Kara aware that the storyteller is her grandmother or great grandmother?
They do address that at one point. She knows her descendancy. I don't think that she knows exactly who she is, though. I don't think that she knows.
She's not there. She's not there in the scene where Vince figures it out.
I'm almost sure that she doesn't know, because the way she acts, she almost definitely doesn't know. Yeah,
she just thinks of her as this like crazy old woman who's just spilling these secrets.
I don't think she would believe. Vincent. He's definitely. We can definitely argue that he's not like the sharpest tool
in the shed.
But at the same time, he goes through a character arc that I really like. Because it's this idea of like, he's a scientist. He thinks that because he's a scientist, the sheer virtue of his going out to seek knowledge is a selfless act. And over the course of the storyteller's story, but he realizes very quickly, or not very quickly, he realizes over the course of the book that
he realizes at a glacial pace that
maybe this isn't so good after all.
Well, he realizes that he at the very onset, he came here doing it for his own reasons. He was coming to fix his own family's reputation and glorify his family's reputation. He wasn't coming for the good of science, or definitely not for the good of the island.
And it's a very relatable goal. It doesn't make him out to be like a bad guy, in my opinion.
But I think it's a very nice parallel to his dad, though, isn't it? Where it's like what Carl Denham was doing wasn't really moral either, but you understood why he was doing it.
Like the fact that he wants to find the skeleton, the lost skeleton of Kong, bring it back to Skull Island, to New York, and display it in a museum for everyone to see.
Yeah, I thought that was a really nice kind of through line for his character, where it starts out as a nightmare he has, like walking in and seeing the skeletons in the middle of this big hall, and then the skeleton of Kong would come to life and like try to kill him. And then at the end, it becomes like this kind of peaceful thing, like this therapeutic release for him of realizing that's not what he wants anymore. He wants to leave Kong to rest on his island.
Yeah.
I loved all that stuff. I thought that elements of the character of his characterization were really good. And for Jack Driscoll as well, I thought that he was really well used. Not necessarily a character you even like needed to necessarily bring back, but they made it feel needed. I feel given how he was used, and as both a point of view character and as an element of the thematic crux of the island story.
Yeah, and I do like how Jack Driscoll, he kind of starts off with this sort of stereotypical racist view of the Islanders, seeing them as nothing more than just crazy savages, much like how, what everyone thought back in the 1930s. However,
in fairness to him, his prior experiences with them weren't exactly good.
Very true.
Right, well, he has to see that, that they can be, he has to see their other side. Ashira also doesn't, the storyteller doesn't villainize him either. She's all like, I totally understand why. I felt the same way about the people who you were interacting with. As you guys realized by the end, that day she was about to die by all their hands, and she actually was really happy that Carl Denham came because he fucking saved her life.
True, very true. Yeah,
I really love all that. It's all ad hoc storytelling. But
it's that idea that effective. It's like we are all human beings, and human beings are capable of good and terrible things. And I love how they kind of established that. It's like, hey, we got our own case of bad apples as well. It's not like a Pocahontas or Avatar situation where like they make
not at all. So much better than those things.
Yeah, they make the natives out to be so much virtuous and more pure-hearted simply because they are more in tune with nature. Fuck that! These people, they took advantage. They kidnapped poor young Kong and wrapped him up into a tree and shit.
I love that element of his backstory.
I really enjoyed that section of the story because it was like we saw the natives attempting to do the same thing that Denham would eventually attempt to do.
Yep. Such a great part of Kong's backstory as a character, isn't it? To really also explain why he freaked out like he did.
Right.
he was having bad memories of like, I've been through this shit before.
He was going through a Rambo moment in 33 this whole time.
Very much so. Very much so.
Fight the good fight.
Yeah, no, I love that too. So how did you guys? So Dylan, how did you feel about Jack being thrown in there? Did you like how he was used, or do you think they could have done more with him?
I really liked Old Man Jack. I think it was probably my favorite. He's probably my favorite character, honestly. He was great. He was a lot of fun. He felt the most out of the characters who returned. He felt the most like his original person. You know, he felt the most like Bruce Cabot.
Yeah, he felt
like the original actor's performance. I got you.
Yeah, he felt like a natural evolution of the portrayal we saw in the movie.
That too, yeah.
Because another one of my those little gripes that I mentioned is that Carl Denham feels off to me when we finally get to him, but we'll talk about that later.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that later.
But I really liked old Jack. I wish that we had gotten at least one scene with Anne. I thought it was weird that Anne. They mention Anne several times, but she never shows up. She's
mentioned quite a bit. The boat's named after her that they're on. There's a lot of nice little touches, but it makes sense too. Like the way it's addressed, like he's not even going to admit. I don't even think he told her that they were going back to Skull Island. You know, because like she would have stopped it.
There was a great line late on in the book where he says, "I wish Anne could have been here because then maybe her nightmares could have stopped." And it was a nice reminder to me because I was like, "Oh yeah, original." Andero was not about that Skull Island life. Like the whole
not about Kong either.
The whole blonde chick becoming like friends with Kong and like understanding Kong. That was introduced in the 76 version. Fay Ray is very much like Fay Ray is very much like get this fucking monkey away from me.
Yeah. Definitely. I definitely agree that her being there would have been cool, but it makes 100% sense that she wasn't.
I thought we would see her at least once, maybe before they leave, maybe early on in the book. You could have Vince go to their house or something and have her just be there.
Maybe at the end too, like you see kind of them all have a little reunion, maybe like her, Jack, and Vincent. Maybe they tell her that, you know, Carl's officially dead, you know, because he wasn't the whole time, you know.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that would be, you know, she one of my other big positive things about her side of it is how Jack goes, she's kind of his biggest champion even to this day, that in terms of Carl Denham, like, you know, she still views him as having saved her life. She doesn't think about her sacrifice to Kong as being his fault. She only sees the good of, I was poor, he picked me out of a bread line or, you know, off of an apple stealing line and brought me into stardom and got me hooked up with a man. So I really like how Carl Denham is portrayed, you know, before like we even go back to Skull Island, you know, in terms of like the very like morally ambiguous way he's portrayed to Vince, you know, all these different voices in his head, all these different people telling him about his dad, and the whole time he's going, I barely remember the guy. I was 10 when he disappeared, you know?
It's a little bit like Trunks in Dragon Ball Z Abridged when he's like, what was dad life? Like, he had a lot to prove.
Yeah. I really like that moment when he finds the map behind the old picture of his dad and he looks at the picture. See, that picture, like when he's describing it looks like, I totally imagined like Robert Armstrong, you know, just like looking at the camera, just all like, fuck off. Like,
and there are a couple instances in this book of like major like retconning going on for the original film, and that's probably the first one when they just immediately at the beginning go, oh, by the way, he had a wife and kid that you never saw.
Well, that's another instance of it being more in continuity with the original novelization than the movie, because a lot of the characters in the movie were cast younger than they were intended, and Carl Denham is the big one. Englehorn as well was supposed to be older. Although he's definitely closer. But Denham, you know, that line about, I'll go get a girl even if I have to marry one. That's not in the original novelization.
All right.
Even if I have to kidnap one, which is what they use.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, because then when they eventually find him at the end of the book and he's like an old man with a cane or whatever, and I'm like, that much time hasn't gone Like he should be like in his 60s.
Well, remember
or
also, yeah, but Dylan, it was also like he went there in 1933.
Right, no, 34.
He was on Skull Island.
He left 34.
Oh, in 34.
And the
in 34
book,
he went.
and the book takes place in the present day.
In 1957.
57, yeah. So it's been almost 30 years at that point.
Right, but like if you're going on movie Carl Denham, it's
yeah, he'd probably be
that old.
Like 50s.
He's also
60s.
been exploring. So you guys also didn't read so you guys don't have the back of the book, which sucks because you get his diary, which is so good. And is very much so written in the voice of Robert Armstrong's Carl Denham.
Wow.
That's why I love it so much. And you get to find out what he was doing for all those years, and he was doing some very physically laborious shit. So I think that it's just wear and tear. He was exploring Skull Island for all this time. It wasn't like, see, when you actually just read the book, and I think that you guys may have gotten the impression that he was just kind of sitting in a cave for 20 years, contemplating his life. But no, you find out he went through some shit. He went on his own adventures and encountered monsters that aren't even mentioned in the book proper, that I'll talk about later.
Yeah, like they clearly it was established that he had like a collection of journals. I don't know where he got all that paper, but he had a collection of journals.
He must have brought it with him. He must have known.
Yeah.
Oh no, he did say that. Like he knew what he was going to do. Like he knew he was going to stay there for a while. What he didn't plan on was Englehorn and everybody else getting killed.
Right. That was sad.
I really like that they filled out those details as well, because when I first read the book, it was like they just fucking kill Englehorn and everybody else at the very beginning, just like all willy-nilly. That bugged me. But then when I got to the end, I was like, oh no, all right, so he got a proper burial and everything, and Carl obviously feels for the man even to this day. So there's some emotion there that I felt was lacking at the start.
I mean, when he first showed back up, I did think like, well, where the fuck have you been this whole time? Because that was like the one twist that I guess worked, because I thought he was dead, from the beginning of the book.
Oh yeah. There's no indication that he's still alive until you get there.
I mean, had I not read the comic, it would have been a bit of a surprise.
There's even a line where Vince is asking about him again, and at one point the storyteller is like, Carl Denham is not here or whatever, and I was like, okay, he's dead. Like, I thought that was confirmation.
Well, also the big one is when OG says, for the love of Mike. By the way, Carl Denham, I think he says that once in the original movie.
Mm-hmm.
He says that a lot more in Son of Kong. That's one of the little subtle references to Son of Kong. Because the big thing that this retcons is Son of Kong. No Son of Kong.
Yes, that's right.
Son of Kong
that's the really major thing.
Son of Kong cannot happen in this universe, mainly because of the ending.
So there are some very sly references to it, though. One of the, and you guys won't know this because you don't have the print copy, but one of the rooms that they're in at the end of the book, Vince and the storyteller and Kara, it's just the treasure room from Son of Kong where they find the treasure. It's the same. It's just that. So, and I really like it. Again, it just shows that these guys are big King Kong fans. And it's just little stuff like that only people who watch all the movies are going to catch up on.
So maybe this is one of the things that's different between the book and the movie. But the thing that bugged me about Carl Denham in this was that he just didn't feel like Carl Denham. In
what sense?
Okay, so my problem with Vince was that he was supposed to be a scientist, and he didn't really feel like he was one. Carl Denham feels a little bit too much like a scientist. Like he's way.
They talk about that a lot, though, how he was kind of sort of made for that anyway.
His father was an average explorer, but he was a brilliant scientist.
Like he's way more intellectual in this than you ever really get the sense of him being in the film.
That is a lot more in the book, though. Yeah.
Okay.
I do see that.
Well, in the book,
I always thought that was just him being more wiser. Like his years have humbled him, and he has learned from his mistakes.
There's a difference between wisdom and being a completely different person. But
it's also like
change, Dylan.
But I don't think he is a completely different. I feel like his personality is still very much the same. You don't think his personality is still very much there, like the Carl Denham, like the boisterous Carl Denham of old. Even if he's not making movies and trying to conquer the world anymore, but in his kind of his wryness and in his kind of jubilation with every sentence. I thought his personality was very much captured.
I just didn't get the sense of the man. I didn't get the sense of the same guy who told the story in the original movie about the cameraman who got out of the way of the rhino. Like he just didn't feel like
I
that character.
disagree. And I think
me.
that I feel like the drawing and the science part of it, it feels like a natural extension to me if he's not going to be making movies anymore. You know, that was his interest anyway. He was out there making all these jungle movies. He was obviously always interested in this kind of stuff. And he just got the time finally to focus on it and develop those skills over the course of 20 years.
But
So
I just always figured that the reason Carl Denham made Jungle Pictures is that was what was popular at the time. You know,
no, I don't. But that's not why Cooper did. I never got that sense.
but
That was his passion.
and
He was
maybe
he was
this
the thing that made it popular.
maybe this is one of those instances where if I had actually read the physical book, it would have come across more.
Yeah, the back of it definitely goes a long way to filling it out. And again, I feel like it being written in Carl's voice, his personality comes out even more in the back of the book.
Because there's an
especially-
interesting conceit in the way that we had to do this episode where Bill does fully endorse the book, but not necessarily the audiobook that we listened to.
No, I don't 100%. I have problems with the audiobook that I don't have with the book because it's not an audiobook. My big issue with the audiobook is that I just don't like the way it's read. The voice, the guy that they got.
It's very overly enthusiastic. I'll give it.
I think that's also part of the reason why Vince came across as so dumb to me, because whenever he has one of those realizations, the way that the guy reads it is like, "You mean to tell me that?" And it's like,
yeah, I think that goes a long way to making a lot of the characters feel like way sillier and cornier than the book does. A lot of it.
I know you told us, like, before we went into the audiobook, you told us that, like, the reader, the person going through it, if I can look up his name, he was attempting to do like a sort of
Joey Diaria.
Thank you. He was attempting to pull off like a 1930s sort of accent, like transmetropolitan or transatlantic accent. Transmetropolitan, that's a entire different thing. That's a comic book. And so I did keep that in mind, and it didn't bother me as much. At first, it was kind of like, I'm so used to having like people are usually having like a very solemn, very deep, serious voice as they're reading along through the story of whatever book I'm listening to. And it did took a while for me, but in a way that sort of the exaggerated style of reading did kept my attention throughout all the story. And although sometimes I kind of get lost in the emotions of how he was reading it, so I would sometimes miss key pieces of exposition, so I'd have to go back and listen. Oh, wait, what was it again that he was saying?
I do that with audiobooks all the time. Yeah, I feel the same way.
I did zone out a few times and have to rewind a little.
I as an avid audiobook listener, I think everybody does that. You know, when you're just listening to these things for a long time, you just kind of have to, I got to go back a little bit. I do that, reading print books. I'm like, what happened?
It's worse with me. It's worse when I'm reading a book. That's why it's like I prefer audiobooks, because listening to someone
forces you to read it at a certain pace.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
see, I feel like it's worse with the audiobook, just because if I'm reading a print book and like I miss a line, it's easier to go back with an audiobook.
That's fair.
Like, oh, shit, pull out my phone.
That's why I really loved what I did with this, where I listened to the audiobook while I looked at the print copy. That I was like, I was living the good life, it's like if there was something I didn't like about the audiobook, I was like, oh, that doesn't feel that way when I read it.
So it's like,
and especially with the images, it's just so, it's definitely, if you can get the print copy of this, please do. It is just, that's the real deal.
It's fun. It's a fun listen to read the audiobook, but it's no Scott Brick.
No,
the guy.
I think the biggest problem is that when he's doing the Islanders, did you guys feel it was like, I don't know who's talking? It all kind of sounds the same.
Not really. No. I
he was doing almost like a Native American voice, like where he was like pronouncing everything very precisely, like I think that we should fucking, you know what I mean? Like he was being very. He was
making an effort for sure, but I just feel like when it was like it was all Skull Islanders in the narrative, I was a little bit like I wish that maybe we had other voices. I don't know. It doesn't 100%. It feels a little goofy, but it's not bad.
I do like his Captain.
Didn't you say that he straight up got one of the characters' names wrong. Like,
Oh yeah.
I think it's it's the way Kubali's name is spelled. It's Kublai. You know, that's not really. You would say Kublai.
Kubala.
Right.
Kubala.
Because when I was listening to the audiobook, I was picturing Kubali, which is how he's pronouncing it.
Right. So I don't know, but that could also just be because it's a weird island word. It might be supposed to pronounce Kubala, but it's just spelt like that because it's a weird language. I don't know.
Right. And then like the name,
but it's hard to tell.
The name like Ishara is pronounced Ashira.
It could be that he read it wrong the first time and then just kept reading it that way. Like I've done that before. Like you read a word wrong the first time, and then every time you look at it again, you're not even paying attention now it's spelled anymore because you're just pronouncing it the way that you read it the first time. You know what I mean?
They may have also just agreed that it sounded phonetically better to just stick with it.
It does, honestly.
He also kept.
I agree with you. I mean, that's why I said for this video, let's just stick with the way he pronounces it because I'm not going to start saying Kublai because Kubali sounds better.
I'm not sure why he had to pronounce Denham as denim.
But that's how everybody always said it's denim.
That was a joke.
That was another poor attempt at a joke.
Oh, was it? Oh my god! I'm sorry. It's late for me.
That's the same joke I did last time we talked about this. And you felt.
Did you really?
No. Last time it was. Last time the joke was. He keeps pronouncing Vincent, and that was the joke.
God, you keep pulling that on me. I'm like, I don't know. You're kidding. I just think you're stupid. Nah.
Let's see.
But all right, so I'm glad that didn't bother you guys as much as I thought it would.
My biggest issue so far that I've come across in terms of audiobook narrators is when someone reads a book too fast. And I don't want to name names here, but there's a particular audiobook where the person just kept rushing through his book as if he was under a time limit.
That definitely wasn't an issue here. Like he was very understandable. He was audible, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it the hearing equivalent to legible? Audible?
I guess, yeah. Discernible.
Discernible. Yeah, that's a good word for it.
Comprehensible.
That wasn't the problem at all. Yeah. I think because Bill forewarned me that it wasn't the best reading in the world. It didn't really bother me a lot, but
That's why I did it though, because I was like, I think that's why I was like, I'm gonna fully endorse the story and warn you guys that the audio book is not my favorite version of it.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad that you guys enjoyed it more than I thought you might.
Doing the audiobook version was a necessary evil for the purposes of this podcast.
And I might actually send you guys some of the images as we go through this if they come up.
Like for
lazy. I'll send you right now. I'll send you what Carl Denham looks like in his old age. You guys might be.
I just want to say, like, for a lazy fuck like me who's too lazy to pick up a book and read it, and enjoy. That's why I primarily listen to audiobooks. It's a decent alternative.
Yeah.
Sure.
I do have to wonder, though, again, even though the narration didn't bother me that much, I do have to wonder if some of my issues with, like, characterization and stuff came from that fact rather than the book itself. So that's why I brought it up.
No, definitely. I'm definitely enjoying this conversation and the different things that I've never even thought about.
Let's see. So
one issue I did have that had nothing to do with the narration. This is something that comes from the writing of the book itself.
Mm-hmm.
I was expecting more Kong in this Kong book. I feel like Jeff Goldblum. I'm like, is there going to be some Kong in your Kong? Hello? Like,
it does take a long time to get to him, but I think once you get there, what they do with him is always brilliant.
It takes a while to get to Kong, and then the Kong that we do get is spread out a little bit. I mean, part of that is just because he's fucking dead. It's because
they can't do anything with him in the present.
Right.
I
do like what they did with his skeleton. It's like it's a huge moment for all the characters when they finally take a look at the skeleton and see, wow, underneath this like this scary looking monster was a creature that looked just like a man. His skeleton looked like a man. He most likely looked and felt and acted like a man, just in a different body.
Oh yeah,
he was closer to man than beast.
The characterization of Kong in this is wonderful. The interpretation that Strickland and DeVito have of what we saw in the 33 movie.
And from a structural standpoint, I wish that maybe we could have gotten the final battle between Kong and Ga.
Yeah.
later on in the book than when we got it.
Yeah, because like
there's a lot of book after the kind
there's a
of
lot
like
of book after
quo.
that point.
Yeah, I can see that. It's definitely not the climax. The climax is Carl Denham and finding Kong's skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I feel like the fight would have been a more satisfying climax.
Right, but that's the thing though.
That's what the comic tried to do.
Not that
See, that's the thing though.
Great.
That's not like, but that's not really the climax of the. That's the climax of her story. It's not the climax of the story present though. So it would have been hard to structure it that way. Maybe if they would have done it where it's like they would have waited until they found Gau's bones, because they do find Gau's skull at one point.
Yeah, that would have been a good moment maybe to do it.
I'm not saying they couldn't have done it that way, but you would have to restructure the whole story then. There's a lot of things that you wouldn't know.
Well, at least that later bit, yeah. I don't know.
There's a lot of things you wouldn't know about that at that point that you do know already by that point, and it would have to be a completely different thing.
It's mostly just an issue because after Kong beats Ga, I mean that's pretty much it for Kong. That's a wrap on Kong for the rest of Kong, King of Skull Island.
I do agree with you, but I think it's a test.
He finishes the fight with Ga, and then you look at your phone and you're like, "There's like an hour left in this book." Like,
at that exact moment.
What are they gonna do now?
You guys didn't think that the rest of the story was interesting enough to keep going, or?
Oh no, it was still interesting. Yeah,
it wasn't that it wasn't. It's not that it wasn't interesting. It was just.
I think that was the trick here, though, was because there's only so much you can do with Kong, given what we know about his history from the movie, that it was important to make Skull Island and the people on it just as interesting, and the other creatures on Skull Island just as scary. So that way, we don't just have to rely on him being the only thing that we care about. And I think that's the trick here that succeeded.
It's not that stuff isn't interesting. It's just that after that fight, and it's a pretty good fight, it just feels a little anticlimactic that the rest of the movie is basically an archaeological dig.
I can see that. I can see why that would bug you. I think maybe what they could have done.
I don't even know if "bug" is the right word. It just felt. It was just an odd choice, I thought.
Mm-hmm. I think, again, given the way they were structuring the story, they just didn't think they could do it any other way. And I think maybe one way to fix it that would keep the flow of the narrative exactly the same and break up the action a lot more is to just have something attack them at the end. They don't. They do explain why nothing does. But once it's our present day characters on Skull Island in 1957 exploring like Skull Mountain and everything, nothing attacks them.
Right.
Stuff attacks Driscoll when he's underground, and they do explain that they have the herb at that point, so nothing's going to attack them anyway. But maybe to break up the action a little better, have it be revealed that there's one Death Runner alive left in the cave, something like that. You could also make the argument that. You could also make the argument that it kind of neuters the island a little bit, makes it feel less, because it's so dangerous in the original movie. It's just 90 minutes. Like it takes them like half an hour to get there, and it's just like the whole middle of the movie is just death, and like it's like the island is so perilous in the original. Yeah, but I like that the whole point of the story is them trying to get that, so we don't see them taking advantage of it until the end. Right. I think that. And also, again, it's pretty, it's hard to make, and it's strictly something that it's how the ancient civilization got off the ground at all on the island, So I think that it's
But even before they get the seed, it's like Ashira and Kubali are moving around outside the wall fairly easily.
Yeah, well, that's because the storyteller had a few remnants left. So she was able to make a few for them to get behind the wall. That was her whole thing. Like, she was like, I can get a couple people behind the wall, but no one's going to go because they don't want to fuck with Bara 2. And also right. Bara 2 was getting behind the wall the whole time. And because he had some of the seeds left over and he was the only one. So again, I can see that point. It just doesn't bug me. But I can definitely see maybe an attack being a positive thing to throw in at the end, like with some Death Runners or something.
Right. All right. How about this? This was the last thing that I wouldn't say that I had a problem with it, but I would say that it felt a little iffy to me, and that was retconning the part where Ashira comes to New York with denim in the 30s.
That was kind of weird.
Oh, you guys didn't like that?
Well, it fit because we never actually saw the journey to
we see
Manhattan.
Nothing of it.
Yeah, so it made sense. It's just that it's kind of weird that
there's totally room for that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird.
You feel like she would have been there at the show, like she would have been backstage or something, or somebody would have been.
She wasn't interacting with people, like not even Jack and Anne. You know, she was.
It's kind of funny. It's like even like when
somebody would have mentioned it, like one of the reporters would have been like, "Can we get a picture of the native lady?"
The reporters didn't know. Again,
the
people on the boat barely interacted with her. It was just Carl mainly.
And then there's that line in the book, which felt really convenient, if I'm going to be honest, where Jack's like, "Oh, now I recognize her because I was there."
Oh yeah, he's like, I always wondered.
But again, he explains it where it's like we were not allowed to interact with her at all. You know, like he interacted with her like once when they first got Kong on the boat.
Writing wise, it's smart enough to take advantage of something that was never touched upon in the actual movie. But because it was never touched upon, of course,
when they did their rewrite a year later, they added a bunch of stuff in. You know, when they bring Kong to New York to add her in more organically, and Anne and Jack do talk. Anne and Jack talk about her, but
that's fine.
Yeah,
and that's fine, but purely from the standpoint of like with the original movie in mind.
Yeah, just being a fan of the original movie, it's very noticeable and a bit.
It's kind of like whenever Toho did a Godzilla movie where it was like 54 happened. They never like went back and were like retconned like, oh, but also this guy was there in 54 and this is what he did. Like, you know, like it would have been weird if they had done that. You know.
Yeah, but again, I feel like there's a natural space for it in 33. You know, so I don't feel like. It also makes a lot of sense that they had somebody there from Skull Island, otherwise Kong would have died. So I think, again, there's room for it, and it makes the original story make more sense in a way. So it doesn't bother me at all. You know, I think that it's cool that they added. I don't think they should have not added it in just because, oh, well, somebody would have mentioned her. I think the way they did it was really smart, and I appreciate that. But I can understand where you're coming from, with the original movie being all you know, and that it's something that feels like should have been mentioned, but doesn't bug me. But you know, again,
especially because of how antagonistic the relationship between the white people and the natives are in the original movie. Like but they also come together at the end to try and stop Kong from coming through the wall. Like, can you imagine the scene where Carl had to pitch this to Engelhorn? Like, hey, we're gonna bring this old native woman with us.
Like, yeah, but they're already bringing Kong aboard. At that point, it's like that's nothing, you know.
I guess
they're already bringing Kong aboard. At that point, I think that makes sense. I'm sure Engelhorn was like, oh well, thank God, somebody who knows what's going on. You know, I think. Not only does it make sense, I think that it makes the original make more sense in a way. Because it's like, how are they feeding Kong? You know, like I just think that it's a nice little addition to clean that up a little bit.
You know what they should have done? They should have had a moment in the book where Vince says to the storyteller, "So, how did they fit Kong on the boat? Like, where was he?" In relation to like the
that's another thing hold. That's mentioned. That's another thing that's mentioned in the book. It's not in the movie. They ripped out the whole interior of the ship and redid it. I don't know if it was. But that's the thing. It's not like I don't know if Carl was planning on bringing Kong back or if it was just done because. But they do say that like renovations were done on the boat in the book before, and this is in the original Lovelace novelization before it went out, and that's not in the movie. So, but it's not explained if he did it specifically because, like, if Carl paid for it and if it was done for Kong or if it was just done because it had to be done. You know what I mean? They don't explain that.
What did you guys think about the addition of the 1800s European sailors coming to the island?
Love that
whole subplot.
I thought it was
at first it took me aback for the same reason that like the Ashira coming to New York thing took me aback. I was like, well, when you watch the original movie, you kind of get the sense that these are the first white people they've ever seen. But it grew on me, and I really enjoyed it by the end.
Oh yeah, I love Captain Magwitch.
I think it also helps that they're so sacrifice crazy at that point that it's like most of the people who were around were killed pretty quickly after it happened. You know, like they explained that all of the native women who were bedding with the white people were killed, and all of their children were killed.
Wow.
So, you know, like they go pretty, Strickland and DeVito go out of their way to like make it make sense as to why the natives that Jack and Carl and Englehorn encounter don't speak English. You know,
I kind of wish we hadn't had the moment though where Jack finds their like bones in the caverns, because then when they show up, you immediately know how it's going to go down. You're like, okay, they're going to die.
Well,
they're
they
going
could
to
have died at any point, like in this story,
Right.
because it's been
and
so
it didn't,
long.
you know, it could have been any one of them. You know.
Yeah, but he finds like multiple bones, and then he keeps like finding skeletons of Europeans and being like, those fucking savages. Like that's a whole thing when he's down in the
I know.
caverns. And so then when they show up, I'm like, oh, these are the skeletons. Like, okay, let's see how they die.
But a lot of them die. But it's also not like they all die at the same time, though. Dude.
Right.
You know, I didn't get that sense from like, oh, I know. I mean, it's like I also was pretty sure that was what was going to happen to them when they landed on the island. I didn't think they were going to get away. At least not all of them. And one of them does get away.
Really?
Which is actually my only problem.
Was it
Charlie?
Oh, okay, and that must have been like one of those things I must have zoned out when that happened.
And he's one of the things that is a reference to the fact that this is not in continuity with the movie. You know, that this is in continuity with Lovelace's novelization.
What's your problem?
Hold on, I'll get into it in a second. So infamously, Charlie, from one of the most racist elements of the original King Kong.
Asian.
But one of my, I love him. Like I love that character, especially in Son of Kong because he comes back. Like, I'm sure that actor had a ball doing what he was doing in that movie. Yeah. But
it was the 30s. What can you expect a Chinese actor to do in those days?
And again, especially given the period.
He got to say the line "Crazy black man" in here. It's the best line of the movie.
Crazy black man, yeah.
And like he does a lot of badass stuff in Son of Kong in particular. Like they would all be dead in Son of Kong if he wasn't there. So like I have a lot of respect for that character, but I understand why he's problematic in like modern pop culture.
Right.
But he doesn't exist in the original novelization. He's Lumpy, who is in the 05 version as well, played by Andy Serkis.
Where they got both characters.
I didn't realize that Andy Serkis's character was a replacement for the Asian guy, but okay.
But they had both. They had both, remember? And they were friends. Remember they did both?
Oh, that makes so much sense to make them friends.
Yeah,
now.
they did both in that version. And that was one of my
what'd be funny?
Yeah, one of my favorite things about 05. Like I was sitting there going as a very happy little King Kong fan going, "Ooh, they added Lumpy in. Ooh."
You know what's funny? Imagine,
also great.
Imagine they replaced. Imagine how ironic would it have been in 1933? They replaced Lumpy with Charlie for the sake of being progressive.
Yeah, I know, and imagine like how we feel about it now. Like that's really funny. And it's like you compare it to like Mickey Rooney and Breakfast at Tiffany's, which like that's a movie that's 30 years newer than King Kong. Like it's way less racist. So it's
at least you got a real Asian, authentic Asian.
He's actually Chinese, and he's doing, and like he tries to go help Anne. Like it's a pretty progressive.
But here's the thing.
They don't let him.
If he had been a more major character, though, they might have had a white guy in yellow face. I feel like they got a real Asian character because
he's got to be subservient to the white man.
Because
they got a real Asian guy because it didn't matter. He's in the movie for like 2 minutes, combined. So it's.
I mean, he's the first one who has dialogue with Anne.
That was an exaggeration. It's more like 5 minutes. The point is,
he's a fairly major character, actually. He discovers the native necklace. He's a fairly major character, but no, he's definitely not like. I see your point, though. If
he's
he
like
had
he's like a third tier character in that movie.
I see your point though. Is like if they were gonna make Jack Asian to be progressive back then, like if they were gonna go that far, like it would have been a guy in yellowface.
Right. Yeah, which they wouldn't have done that because
they would have pulled a Lost World on that.
Wait,
for that movie.
King Kong pre or post code? I always forget when the code.
That's pre-code, motherfucker.
Oh yeah, so they can.
That's why Anne's like practically naked at the end. I mean, 76 had a lot of balls paying homage to that. I mean, 05 even, I mean,
they could have had Anne fucking Asian. All right.
Totally. I mean, nobody could have stopped them.
Yeah. Should write like a fake woke article, like condemning 33 for not having Anne sleep with an Asian guy.
Totally. Let's do it. I brought that up for a reason. Oh, so anyway, Charlie as a character thrown in here. I think is a nice little like nod to him and a nod to the film version, and again a little acknowledgement that this is different. My problem with him is that there's a line in the book about he made a map of Skull Island and went off and it was used by other people to get there. That doesn't line up at all with any version of what Carl Denham says he got the map from, though.
Carl, where does Carl say that he got it?
So in both the original, so in every version, in the original novelization, in the movie, in the rewrite, the captain of a Norwegian bark, a ship full of natives, blew away from this island, and there was only one alive when he picked them up. He died before they reached port, but not before he drew a description of the island based on what the native said. That is in every version. That's never been different. So the implication of that line in this book to me was that the map that Charlie drew is eventually the one that Carl Denham used to get to the island. Oh. But that doesn't make sense with any version. Now, should mention, in that Kong of Skull Island comic series that's recent, that's in continuity with this, that's Joe DeVito's Skull Island, there are people who come to Skull Island in 1912, which would make it after Magwitch and all that, but before Carl Denham. So maybe Joe DeVito was playing a long game here and setting that up, but I kind of doubt it. And I feel like maybe, I don't know though, it feels like he would have known that, being a giant King Kong, like he was a skipper of a Norwegian bark, there was no white guy who blew off a Skull Island. Maybe Denham didn't have the true story. Maybe the guy he got the map from was lying is the idea. But that's just something that when I reread it this time, I was like,
the guy that he got the map from didn't even know where it had actually come from. Maybe, like... Right,
but it's just weird because Denham says the guy he got it from made it. So, yeah, maybe he was lying, but...
Or maybe that was the story he had been told. Maybe it was like an urban legend.
Totally possible. Totally possible.
There are ways.
I'm just saying that it's like it should have been more abstract, but it should have been more obviously stated if that was the idea, that what Denham used was Charlie's map. Because again, what we're left with now, it's really vague. All it says in the book is Charlie drew a map which others used to get to the island. So it's like, so was that Denham, or are you setting up what you eventually did later with the 1912 people coming to Skull Island? I haven't read that comic though, so I don't even know if they had a map when they went. I have to read it. But that's not a giant problem, as we're talking about, very easily explained away as, it might not even be Carl that they're referring to, and maybe the guy that Carl got the map from wasn't even 100% on the level. I mean, if you see Son of Kong, he definitely wasn't. If you go by the version of that character we got in that with Hellstrom, again, another one of my
Carl's map could be a completely separate thing from the Charlie map. There could just be two maps.
That's what I'm thinking it must be. That's what I'm thinking it must be, that the story that he told is still accurate, and that the Norwegian guy drew it based on a Skull Island native's description who then died. And that, the map that Charlie drew was then used by the 1912 people that they did in that comic. But it's just weird that, that comic definitely wasn't in Joe DeVito's mind, or if it was, like, he was playing a really long game, The
weird thing is about that dude's story, though, you don't really get the sense that they were a seafaring people. I mean, they go out to the boat and steal in at the one point, but you don't really like how did he wind up?
Well,
we
know at one point they were. We know at one point they were, because they came to the island big Noah's Ark style things with the Kongs.
Right. And at one point,
the Hawaiian natives. Have you ever seen like the story of how the Hawaiian natives got to that island? It's fucking crazy.
No, I didn't.
It's they didn't have sails or anything, so they had to build like these giant
they paddled with their arms.
Yeah, they were basically rowboats, like huge rowboats, and like the way that the Pacific Islanders spread out to all these different islands, it's fascinating because the level of technology that they were working with versus the vast ocean distances that they were crossing.
Yeah, it's that old seamanship stuff is fascinating.
And,
but I always got the sense that
Also,
those people who were.
I want to mention,
No,
like,
go ahead.
Kobali at one point said, when he saw, like, the giant European ship, he's like, that's the biggest boat I've ever seen. So it's like, he's
Yeah.
aware of boats, so it's like, they have boat technology, at least.
They must fish,
Right.
I assume, locally, like in their lagoon and stuff. But they're also people, like, you know, in this, and this isn't shown in the original movie or in the original book. Skull Island is also surrounded by prehistoric monsters.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that's only shown in Son of Kong. You know, that's not really shown in the original.
You know what would have been a great
Uh-huh.
Another nice
You know,
little
it would've been
slight reference to that.
you know what would have been a great reference to Son of Kong? I kept waiting for it to happen and it never did.
What?
Fucking put a giant bear on this island somewhere. Let him come across with
Sure.
big bears.
Yeah, no, that would have been cool.
I thought it was interesting that they came
So-
up with, like, new monsters or new species. They didn't actually take real dinosaurs for the most part for this story.
Yes.
It all mostly focused on original creations like Gaw and the Death Runners.
Why don't we
You
talk
hear-
about that, because
You
we
hear a
haven't
lot.
talked
You
about
hear a
that
lot
much
about
yet.
you hear a lot about like Triceratops, but
Yeah, and the Pteranodons.
It's a very 05-esque interpretation of Skull Island in that
Right.
sense that these are dinosaurs that have evolved well past the fossil record. They are essentially different
Right.
creatures that come from that same mold. And I think it's taken to a way more interesting extreme than 05, especially with what they do with Gaw and the Death Runners, because at that point you essentially have like dinosaur people. Like the way that was described, I thought was just so cool, because they didn't make it seem like silly and corny, like, oh, dinosaur people, woohoo, it's fucking Land of the Lost.
Uh-huh.
I love the
What
way
do you call the
Ashira
Slee
was almost like
Stacks?
the Slee Stacks, yeah,
Yeah.
in Land of the Lost. I love how Ashira was almost like afraid to kind of describe them that way. Like she was like, when my ancestors came to the island at first, there were already others here. And Vincent's like, what do you mean by others? And he's like, I don't like that word though. And then she essentially explains like they were not human, not animal. And she was essentially setting up the Death Runners and the fact that they are like super raptors, like
Right.
raptors that have evolved well past that and have essentially become like primate dinosaurs, and there's a lot of creatures like that on the island, especially if you look at the back of the book. I'll talk about it a little bit later. There's a lot of like primate-esque dinosaurs on the island, and obviously that was kind of a through line with DeVito's idea with how that evolution would go. And a lot of people have fucked with that too, like that Dougal Dixon book, The New Dinosaurs. There's a lot of like primate-esque dinosaurs in that. But what did you guys think of Gaw? Gaw is kind of the big thing in this, isn't she? She's kind of she was the original Kong, and her race were the original things that Bara 2's people worshipped. Like the Kongs were. We can get into the history of the Kongs in a few minutes separately, but they didn't. I think people assume that the Islanders worshipped Kong species always. And this makes it very clear that that's not the case. And I actually really like the idea that Kong had to earn his kingship. I love that. And I love the use of Gaw in doing that. And I love Gaw as a character as like a contrast to Kong, as an enemy for Kong. How'd you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting idea to have a prior island god that Kong had to dethrone. That's a really cool premise for an origin story. It also feeds into the whole backstory of how his parents die and how he grows to be the biggest Kong who ever lived.
Yeah, I love how they explain that, like, because he got really carnivorous and like aggressive, that's why like he was so different from any other Kong in history.
Yeah,
he was a super Kong. I love it.
That makes sense. One of the many theories that float around out there in scientific circles as to why our ancestors, like, because there's this whole period of our evolution where like the brains of our primate ancestors like doubled in size over a very short span of time, evolutionarily speaking, and nobody really knows why. But one of the theories is that it happened around the time that they started supplementing their diet with meat. And so that actually makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. There's also theories that it had to do with magic mushrooms, but that's
Joe Rogan has talked about that before. I know.
Wait,
every chance he can bring it up. Joe Rogan. But yeah, So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I really just I thought it was again really well executed as well and just a great way of having these kind of demon-esque creatures on the island, because we're fucking with mythology and we don't want this to feel like just a boring dinosaur island. This is not just a lost world. This is essentially like a modern metaphor for the Garden of Eden, you know, and it should feel otherworldly and divine in many ways. And I think that the way that the Death Runners and Gaw are characterized go a long way to making that work, where it's like, because we have these hyper-intelligent dinosaurs to contend with on the island, it makes a lot more sense that the Islanders would view them as gods. You guys know what I mean? Like it makes more sense that the culture around the dinosaurs develops that it does, because they're not just dinosaurs. They are enemies. You know, it's almost like what Engelhorn said in the original, where, a hostile tribe. In many ways, it started out that way. In many ways, the wall was built to keep a hostile tribe out. It wasn't built to keep Kong out. The Kongs are the ones who fucking built it.
Yeah,
Did you guys like that?
I love that one. I love the idea, the revelation that the Kongs worked with the Islanders, and that they were at one point like they had like a symbiotic relationship with each other. And I was like, holy shit.
It made a lot of sense also just from like a labor perspective, you know. It reminded me a little bit of in 10,000 BC when they had the fucking mammoths building the pyramids.
Yeah. There's a lot of like that but good in this, isn't there? You know, and like in terms of
I liked how, like, even though they spill, like, their entire history on Skull Island, there's still a bit of mystery to to this civilization, because it's implied that they came from somewhere else, and that for whatever reason,
they
had to
intentionally leave that vague.
Yeah, for whatever reason, they had to leave wherever they used to live. You know, who knows? Maybe Atlantis.
Yeah, a lot of Kong versions, go with that the Islanders are descendants of Atlantis, and this, it's like very heavily implied that even if it wasn't Atlantis, it was some kind of culture that like inspired that myth. You know what I mean? Like maybe, the sense that I get, given how Joe DeVito writes the Kongs, I get this because the way that the Islanders describe them is like, the giants. They don't call them apes, or like they don't treat them as animals. They treat them like giants, like how like Greek mythology treated the giants. And so maybe the Kongs are the influence for them. So maybe Hyperborea. You guys ever hear of the Greek mythological continent of Hyperborea that was supposed to exist? It was supposed to be a like super Atlantis, like Atlantis, but it was entirely populated by giants.
Okay.
Atlantis on steroids.
Exactly. And the idea in Greek mythology was that all giants descended from this lost continent, and that their civilization was like just a sham of what they once were. So I get the sense that in Joe DeVito's mind, Atlantis and Hyperborea together are where the Skull Islanders came from, and the Kongs are mythological giants, and I think that's really cool. What do you guys think of that?
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Yeah. And
it could very well be.
I don't know. I'm very conflicted as to whether or not I want Joe DeVito to eventually delve into that one day, or just to leave it.
Well, they have a little bit in that comic. That's part of why I was a little bit like, I don't know how I feel about this when I first read it. I'm sure I'd like it a lot more now, though.
Okay.
Because again, you actually see them get the Skull Island in the beginnings of the civilization. That's what that comic is all about.
I see. So another thing I liked was how they kind of explained how and why the Kong species died out over time, simply because they were not native to this environments, and so they were like unprepared for like they were unprepared to defend themselves against the horrors of the island creatures, such as the Death Runners and Gaw herself. I'm not sure how long Gaw has been around, but they've that's a subspecies of the Death Runner. So the way Ashira explains it is that like every generation of Death Runners, there is a Gaw born. Right. I love that idea, by the way. I love how it's like one Death Runner happens to be the smartest and strongest, thrives off of lives the longer it lives, the larger it grows, and ends up killing off its rivals so that it can remain the biggest, baddest motherfucker around, and that's how Gaw came to be. I really love that idea. And yeah, it's a really good, interesting explanation, a very interesting and tragic explanation for why Kong species died out and why Kong ended up being the only survivor left.
Yeah, I think that's all really well handled.
I also really loved the explanation for why so much of the dinosaur science in the original movie is wrong. And this is the most
Wrong.
This was the most shocking part. This was the most shocking part about realizing that this and the 05 movie were being made simultaneously and thus couldn't have influenced one another, because it like the 05 movie, it does the thing where, oh yeah, of course they're not like real dinosaurs because they've continued to evolve while they've been alone on this island. You know, one of the few moments in the book where Vince feels like an actual scientist to me is when he has that epiphany. Because before he goes to the island, he's like, oh well, you know, the descriptions of the dinosaurs that they came back with
that's a
don't
big
really
point
match.
of contention with him. Yeah.
Don't really match anything that I know of, and I'm a paleontologist.
Yeah.
And then he goes there and he's like, well, of course it doesn't match because they've been evolving. Like that was a great moment. And listening to it, I was like, I see where you get your ideas from, Peter Jackson. But no, as it turns out,
I think they were being made simultaneously. Yeah.
Oh,
so as it turns out, this was just one of those weird things where two different people had the same idea at the same time.
Yeah.
And I got to also mention this. I loved the way Gaw was set up as Kong's rival. I loved way more. What I loved with Gaw and the Death Runners, I honestly enjoyed way more than Ramarak and the Skull Crawlers.
Well, they just didn't. It just doesn't have as much time to develop. They don't show Kong's parents being killed in the movie.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of mystery. There's more mystery in the movie Skull Island even than in this. You know, a lot more, in fact.
And Ramarak just shows up at the very end of the movie, and it just.
I mean, we don't even know Ramarak's name in the movie.
And it's just a larger skull crawler model.
Well, no, there's a lot of differences actually if you look at it between the what it looks like and what the smaller ones look like. But
I would say that obviously Gaw and the Death Runners are more fleshed out, obviously, because this is a book versus a 2-hour movie. But I don't know. I think there's an argument to be made for the Skull Crawlers. They're much more unique, obviously, from a design perspective.
But they're also completely different things. You know, like they're not meant to be as intelligent. They're not meant to be as much of like a rival civilization. You know.
Right. They're just like pure hunger, like personified in that movie. Like they just consume.
Pure they're the reptile brain personified 100%. And I think that's why it works in that movie.
They remind me of that line from Doctor Who when he's facing the Rachnos Queen, and he's like they used to consume whole worlds, and she's like, Rachnos children are born starving. Like that's kind of how I imagine the Skull Crawlers are. But
I think the culture and the intricacies of the Death Runners in Gaw, again, definitely more interesting, but more fleshed out and different. I think ultimately, I'm glad that they at least were influenced by all of that for Ramarak and for the Skull Crawlers, though, as opposed to just doing
But I just liked. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, we're both talking about the same thing. We're good.
I was just gonna say, I like the Skull Crawlers, but I like this more.
Me too, but again, I think it's a matter of development and time, and also the fact that Kong Skull Island came out of this in the first place, that was always kind of in the cards. There was always going to be a rival to Kong, because that was the big point of difference that I think they were working with from the get-go of like, this is going to be a little bit of an origin for him. We kind of have to see him take over the island fully. And they didn't even do as much of it as I think they were gonna when it was supposed to be more of a straight up adaptation. But anyway,
one other thing I'll say for the Skull Crawlers over Gaw and her posse is as cool as the final battle between Kong and Gaw is in this book. Man, that Skull Island fight though, especially the finish.
That end fight is pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's all. I really like that both exist. Like they're both so different. And again, I really like that.
Two variations on a very similar idea.
But again, I like that. One of the things I like about the new Skull Island movie is that it takes so much from so many different versions. It's essentially it's a 76 kind of story mold and setting, but it's like the 33 island. But there's some of the developments from the Joe DeVito books, and that's what I think works about that movie. Anyway, So back to King of Skull Island though. So what did you guys think of the war between the two different races on the island. Did you guys think that was well executed?
You mean the two
and
tribes?
Interesting?
You mean the two tribes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The two tribes. Yeah, the Atu and the Tagu.
Tagu, yeah. I like the idea that it started out as one civilization, the Tagatu, and then over time, like, they kind of split off into two factions. One's more like the warrior class, the other's more the science, like nature class. And it was just like two different ideals that try to coexist but fail to. The system, like, you know, the whole civilization breaks down. Yeah.
I like that the Tagu are not portrayed as perfect because they are part of the reason why the Atu turned against them in the first place, because they got to a position of power and stagnated and kept all their secrets to themselves and wouldn't let the Atu in on it. So the Atu were forced to go off on their own, and that's why there was the divide. Again, this book is just so good at not being black and white, which is interesting because it comes out of a black and white movie. But it's so not. It's a very well shaded conflict, and I was so happy about that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that aspect of it, and the whole politics behind it all. There's different allegiances. I love when Magwitch gets thrown into the bit, and his men gets thrown into the business. It's like I'm on no one's side but my own. I'm just trying to play it safe by teaming up with both of you guys, with Baratu and Kubali.
But I like that he's like, I like you, Kubali.
Yes,
but
I love that line.
Is technically more powerful, so I'm sort of stuck here.
Yeah, he's like, it's almost like you want to root for Magwitch. It's like he's too charming not to hate.
Well, he's definitely like a slightly more evil Carl Denham, and a slightly more evil in the sense that he's looking for gold. I am a pirate looking for gold.
Yarg.
But at the same time, though, he has a lot of Denham's positive qualities as well. His jubilation, his bravado, as well as his care for his men. He deeply seems to care for his men until they disobey him, and then he goes too far in trying to keep them in line. I think that he too is and also he got so close with Ashira over her father's death. Mm-hmm. He's a very, very well layered character in that way.
Yeah, like he's a different person for a different situation.
Yeah, well, Ashira got to know him personally after they were trapped on the island, and then she got to know his business side as well. I really like Kubali's Kubali is one of my favorite characters in this because I just think that he's super relatable. Totally stuck between two different worlds, trying to do what he thinks is right for his girl and his people, and all that happens to him is bad stuff. He becomes king, doesn't get to fuck his girl anymore, doesn't get any power out of it, and is just trying to kill this giant monster. Finally kills the giant monster, gets murdered.
Right.
What a fucking life.
And like the skeezy like Bara too, he's always got some sort of like extra
he's always 5 steps ahead.
Yeah.
He's such a scumbag.
he's like,
I came back first with the tooth, motherfucker.
It's like,
Kong's my bitch now.
I summoned Kong. I knew God would fail us. It's like, you skeezy motherfucker,
well, see,
you.
That's actually the beautiful part about that plan. He was pulling a Chancellor Palpatine. It didn't matter who won the fight between Kong and Gaw.
Yeah. Because
either way, he would have come out on top. If Gaw kills Kong, then let's see. I told you guys. Fucking my God, he's the best. Root. Or if Kong wins, then he's like, you see, fucking I summoned Kong. I realized that Gaw had become a problem. And he couldn't do anything about it, so I handled that shit.
Yeah, it was I really love that moment, and I really love when it was revealed that he had the seeds, but that he was running out, and that's why he ends up failing in the end, because he thinks he wins it first by gaining power, becoming king, and making the people worship Kong now. But what Ashira says is that what was very quickly realized is that Kong is very different from Gaw and was not controllable. And I love the point that she makes that Baratu was not king of the island, Kong was. I really love that. And I love that that's really why the fucking religion was at the state that it was in the movie. Because it wasn't anymore like, they're just feeding a couple of people to some dinosaurs every couple of months. It's a primal thing now of like, Kong is gonna come calling for his girl, Yeah. I really loved all that.
And I do love the idea that, like, with all the people that the people sacrificed to him, he didn't eat them, he didn't kill them, he just kept them for company until they eventually passed away.
You guys like that? I was wondering how you would feel about that.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting, and it fit in line with the version of Kong that they were setting up, the lonely, isolated version, yearning for companionship, because that's what gorillas do. That's what primates do. They're very social creatures.
I kind of thought that was always the idea. Like, so that wasn't really a revelation to me. Like, in every version of King Kong I've ever seen, I've never thought that. 05 is the only one that seems to imply that he was killing them.
Yeah, he would throw them in a ditch.
That was
the one where it was implied that he was killing them, and that's part of why I don't like that movie that much. But I really like the way that it is handled here, where it's
like in 33, where he grabs that woman out of the window and she's the wrong one, so he just
chucks her.
Yeah, totally. At that point, though, I think it's like, what was he supposed to do? Just put her back?
That's too much work, Bill.
Sorry.
But even in 05, you could make the argument that maybe he didn't kill them. Maybe they tried to escape and fell to their deaths, or maybe it was like in this where they just died of fright and then he put their bodies down there in the ditch. It's not really clear.
Sure, no, it's
I remember in the director's commentary, I recall Peter Jackson saying, like, oh, he often threw them into that ditch, but then the moment Ann Darrow, like, stabbed him with her own, like, bone necklace, at that point he was kind of lost and confused. He's like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do at this point. This never happened before. I guess I'll just take her with me then.
That's why like that version is so weird, because again, it seems like that he was killing them and like that's the action that makes her different. Not the fact that she has blonde hair and looks completely different from any other girl he ever took away. So it's very muddled in that version. I really like the way it's done here, where he was never killing them. It was, he was always taking them off, and they always just died of fear on their own because they didn't understand him. And I really liked the idea of, again, Kong is not like Gaw. He's not coming there to eat them. Mm-hmm. He's coming there out of a sense of companionship, out of a sense of belonging. Kong starts to view the people behind the wall and the religion around him as his kind of place in the world.
Yeah, the closest thing he has to family.
Whenever he comes up and gets to see them on the top of the wall, I really like that the storyteller theorizes that whenever he would see them on top of the wall, he would go, oh, look, people like me. Like, this is the one moment where I get to connect. I thought that was so fascinating and so just well thought out.
Given what we saw, it's possible that the 76 version of Kong fucked all of them to death.
That's true. Yeah. That's another like we know.
He tried to rape you, honey.
We know even like that's probably the most mysterious Skull Island. We know like absolutely nothing about that one.
Yeah. Are there any other giant animals? We saw the big snake. Is it just him and the big snake, or is there other shit out there?
Yeah. Especially in the Skull Island, like there's no dinosaurs alive on the island, but there are Triceratops skulls and stuff, implying that they were there pretty recently because they're not fossilized skulls. You know what I mean? So I like little references like that, and I really like. I'm sure you guys appreciated this as well. How they mention in this that ever since Carl Denham returned in 34, he's noticed that the dinosaur life has been dying off slowly.
Right.
A third of it has disappeared since he arrived.
Which you would think in the absence of Kong that they would flourish more.
True. Although maybe there's something about the island itself. I wish he would have gone more into why that was happening.
I think it was just...
You would think that with both Gaw and Kong dead, that the other dinosaurs would be like, fucking yeah, this is...
Yeah, but Kong was going around killing a lot of them anyway, so...
Oh, because he was a meat eater now.
I think that's the idea, is that the change in him and in the Islanders motivated it. That's all. That's the really big idea, is that Baratu's cult was also driving them all to extinction because they were overeating and over.
And like you mentioned, like a lot of the meat went to waste because it was too much.
Yeah, they talk a lot about how under Baratu's rule they were wasting meat and wasting resources. So I think that's pretty much it.
And
it's basically fucking Scar from The Lion King.
Yeah.
There's one thing I was going to mention way before, and just before I lose it again, I want to throw it in there. Andres, you got into this before when we were talking about the relationship between the Kongs and the early Skull Islanders. Mm-hmm. I really liked how the Kongs are not, and again, Andres, you said this pretty well. The Kongs are not portrayed as like invincible supermen. You know, they are 100% living, breathing creatures that are not unkillable and invincible. They're not all Kong, you know? And
I think I said that about Gaw, but that also applies to Kong himself. Kong was special because he was able to live longer and had a more brutal upbringing than any other Kong before him.
I even mean that they were just as once they were separate from the Islanders and they were no longer working together, they were equally a threat from the dinosaurs as the Islanders were. It's not like the Islanders were like wholly dependent upon the Kongs for protection. Mm-hmm. You know, that doesn't seem to be the idea. It seems to be that together the humans training the Kongs and kind of keeping the Kongs alert and, you know, regaling them to certain roles was what was making them an effective tool against the dinosaurs. And I like that they said that for a long time, Gaw and the Death Runners, or whatever, you know, Gaw's ancestor is what they say, were subdued for a long time because of the relationship between the Islanders and the Kongs. And it was only after the Kongs went feral that Gaw and the Death Runner, again, Gaw's ancestors and the Death Runners really became a problem again. And that's why the Kongs really disappeared. I really like all that because it just goes a long way to making everything feel more organic. And, you know, I feel like maybe in some versions of Kong, you know, and in, you know, Godzilla can be portrayed this way too, where it's like they just feel like nothing can touch them, you know? And that their whole species is exactly like them. Like their whole species is just like copy and pastes of them. Like they're all just as powerful, you know? I really like how in this it was made clear that, again, they were living and surviving just as hard as the humans. It wasn't easy for them. Right. I loved all that stuff.
And the fact that all of them weren't as big as Kong, you know, it's like, maybe they were Gigantopithecus or something similar to that, you know, like roughly that size.
Let me just think. We've covered. I'm very happy with the ground that we've covered thus far. I'm just trying to think.
I feel like there was one thing I wanted to mention, but I can't seem to remember it now anymore.
I'll mention a quick little thing that I really appreciate because this comes out in a post Jurassic Park world. I love the moment where Jack is being stalked by some Death Runners in the tunnels, or some slashers, whatever they are. I think they're slashers, not Death Runners.
What were the difference?
The Death Runners
are bigger and smarter.
Yeah,
the slashers are they they're regular raptors? Okay,
that's the sense I got. Yeah, so I think he was being chased by them in that scene, but it's a really great moment because he's Jack Driscoll, protagonist of the original King Kong, being written in a book after Jurassic Park comes out, and like has popularized the smaller man-sized dinosaurs being scary. And so there's a moment where he goes, wow, this is scarier than being tracked by a giant meat-eating dinosaur because I don't know where these things are coming from. He's like, this is way worse than being stalked by the giants that me and my men fought back when we first. It's such a great like meta moment of like, I get to write a character from a really old piece of fiction in a new piece of fiction, knowing all this stuff now about paleontology and having him I just thought that was really nice, and it made sense where it's not like they changed Skull Island. It's not like, oh, we're suddenly making it all realistic and everything. It was just
another aspect
all
of
that
it.
Stuff. He experienced all that stuff. It's just now he's seeing a different part of the island that was always there that he's just getting a different taste of now. I really like that. Now, as well as just a little thing.
Imagine within that comic, like, since the comic Kong of Skull Island is being made in a post-Kong Skull Island movie world, imagine they bring back the skull crawler or the creatures that inspired the skull crawler from the 1933 movie. That would be
wild, right? I mean, because they're not in any of this. They're not even.
I kept hoping that there would be a description like, look at that big lizard with only front limbs. That's weird, you know.
Yeah. No, they didn't do them. There was a lot more of a.
Did it appear in the original Wallace novel?
Oh, you mean in Lovelace's original novelization?
Sorry, yeah.
I mean that creature does attack Jack. Yeah, it's just not really described that well. It's just described as a big lizard. It's not really described. Also, you guys have to remember that scene is completely different in the book because the spider pit sequence is in it.
Okay.
Right.
You know, like that's intact in the original novelization.
Now remember, before I forget, so the idea that the dinosaurs are dying out, it reminded me a lot of both Son of Kong and the sort of supplemental material to Kong 05, where they kind of they both interpreted Skull Island as like a dying island that wasn't going to last very long. And
I never liked that about Son of Kong or 05 though, about how it was like Skull Island was on the verge of falling into the sea. I like
it better in 05. It's only weird in Son of Kong because it happened so fucking quickly.
Yeah.
in that it's just like all of a sudden it just drops out of existence into the sea. Yeah, it's hilarious. And but even in 05, like they work it into the concept in 05, so it's not like it doesn't make sense. I just don't like the idea that like it's doomed to be gone for no reason. I like the idea of it being slowly kind of over. So I like the idea that it's slowly killed off by the people who live there and by the slow introduction of outside ideas. I much prefer that than the quick like boom, Atlantis, it's gone. You know, yeah. I think that's too. I think it's too easy in any version.
Yeah. It's also part of like it's also part of like the pseudo mysticism of the whole piece. You know, which there is a point in this book where it becomes much less science and much more sort of mysticism. But it's similar to like in 76 when like. That version of Jack says to the oil guy, he's like, you've taken away their god, like it's all going to be different here now. And the oil guy's just like, yeah, whatever, and then they leave. It's sort of like what happened here, Kong dies, and then like the whole island, what happens after that? Like it just starts to decay apparently, even though you would think that the dinosaurs would do much better.
Well, also the people too. One of my favorite things is how they talk about how badly in shape the wall is after Kong went on his rampage, because he like trashed the doors. Like they are unusable. They make that pretty clear later in the book that like those doors are completely unusable now because of what he did. And I love that. And it just goes a long way to showing that like there were little effects that are long. And if the island had dropped out of existence a year later, that wouldn't matter. But because people have had to survive there for 20 more years, that's a concern for them day to day, is like, well, that wall will never be the same because of what Kong did to it. And I also, there's also some really great ideas in the book of like, we talked about how Carl arriving on the island saved the storyteller from being killed by Bara too.
Yeah.
But Kong busting through the gate also caved in a whole section of the wall that they didn't even know was there, which contained a whole bunch of fucking secrets that might help the people of the island survive in the future.
Right.
There's this brilliant idea of like, again, things are not black and white. Yes, Carl Denham probably shouldn't have kidnapped King Kong. But if he hadn't, Bara 2 would still be in power.
True, and probably, and they would have been fucked either way.
And the island would probably have died off a lot more quickly. Now, the point of the book is there's a chance, and I think that's great. I much prefer that, where it's like Skull Island has a chance to still be something in the future. I really love that's one of my favorite things about this book, and it doesn't need Kong to be special either. Like even though Kong is dead. And we will always, and the island will always be kind of memorialized around him. It's still a place worth exploring in the future. There's that little moment at the end where Vincent is kind of like sitting there dreaming about his plans for the future, and about how excited he is living in a world where he's going to return to Skull Island and try and piece the secrets together.
What did you guys think of the explanation? What did you guys think of the explanation for how the big skull face wound up on the mountain?
That was pretty interesting.
That.
Yeah, that like they want to make a human face to show their superiority, but in the end it shows what was it? Ashira says the true face of egoism, or the true face of their ego and arrogance.
Hollow death.
Yeah.
In the face of an attempt to conquer it.
it's a really good explanation. I don't know if I did an explanation for that. I always kind of liked that it was just like a natural formation that just
but they didn't change it completely by making it like they still say that it looked a lot like that already, and that they were trying to make it more human looking. So I like that they didn't completely change it.
It's also a weird metaphor, just because like they tried to carve a face into the side of a mountain, and that's a symbol of their hubris because nobody can do that. And I'm like, we did it, like 4 of them. Mount Rushmore.
Well, we had dynamite back in the day.
But it's also a different thing of like
33, wasn't it? These people are growing cities out of the ground, and they can't do that. Okay.
But it's also, I think it worked really well, and I think part of it is because, they were wasting their time. Like it wasn't like they had like the same kind of like delegation of resources and of people. They didn't have as big of a population as the late 1800s United States. Where they should have been focused on more important things probably than building a giant monument to their awesomeness on this dinosaur-ridden hellhole. Then maybe they wouldn't have fallen apart. I think that's all that's going on.
Dinosaurs first, and then build a monument to your awesomeness. Maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
But they obviously, I like that. That's not seen as a good thing either. Like the way Ashir perceives it, especially because Kubali early on is like, why don't just 100 of us just go out and kill everything on the island? And Ashir is like, that's not going to be good either. So I really like that there has to be a middle ground and that it's complicated. It's not easy to get there.
One last thing I want to bring up. So the part where they mention how Kong ended up like crushing Bara 2. Did anyone get any flashbacks to the scene from Kong 76 where Kong also steps on the dude that took him to New York?
Totally.
Yes, and I also think it's meant to be the scene, that part in 33 where you see him stomp on a guy and bite him.
Yeah, there's a moment where it's the first person who does it too, who I think is supposed to be Bara 2. It's the one who's on the spear stand when you've got those couple of guys. Because at first they don't throw the spears. I think it's what's being described in the book where he was trying to like, hey Kong, stop this! I'm your controller.
Right.
And he's the first guy who Kong grabs, and then they start throwing the spears. So I think that's the idea.
I rewatched the movie like the day after I finished the audiobook, and there were a couple things that I was watching out for. Like, let me see if that's actually in there, and that was one of them. It's nice that
it's nice that like they obviously rewatched the movie and went that there was little things that they wanted to kind of develop and explain.
And there was also that. It also reminded me of young.
To go back to the casting issue though. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it reminded me. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say it would be like if one of us wrote a book sequel to Godzilla 54, and we gave like a backstory for like that woman who was in the building talking to her children. Like it's just it's just a nice bit of continuity.
Totally.
I was gonna say it also reminded me of that stupid scene from Yungary 1999, where the guy's like, "You're my creation." No,
yes,
it
exactly
isn't
like
real.
That.
I made you.
It makes so much more sense though, especially because they explained that Bara 2 is fucking crazy.
Oh, because he just kept smoking all that cocaine. He's
been doing some weird island drugs. I love that.
Yeah.
At least he was actually constructing. At least the Yungary guy was actually constructing sentences and like the fucking Katagiri from Godzilla 2000. He just goes Godzilla. And it's crowd crush.
Anyway, sorry. What was the thing you wanted to bring up?
Don't remember now exactly.
Okay, we're around 2 hours at this point, so I think we should start wrapping up.
Yeah, no, I think we definitely should. This is probably the longest one of these you guys have done. So
they've been averaging like an hour and a half. So
all right, yeah. So let's wrap up. I mean, I've pretty much we covered pretty much every major element of the book.
Yeah, it's almost like a deceptively simple story with so much to unpack.
I think that's what's so great about it and why I love it so much is that it doesn't seem like necessarily the most complex or even like the best idea. And then once you read it, you go, oh, there's so much to this.
I see it now.
There's so many different sides to this story and to the legacy of Kong.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think that, even though he doesn't get a whole lot of like actual we're in Kong's head following him, I do think that his presence is felt throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, like maybe
You
like
know.
this alongside the 2005, the '05 movie, feel like the most fleshed out Skull Island has ever been. But I would say maybe this one, in terms of its history and lore, this
Come
one
on now,
definitely has
Andres.
it beat. What?
Come on now, Andres. The game is way more fleshed out than the movie.
Okay, you got me beat there. I concede to that.
I think definitely in terms of like making there's always an attempt, and I love this, and I hope whenever we do Skull Island in the future, we always do it. It cannot just be a lost world. It has to be more than that. You know?
When you mean Lost
Like,
World,
that's
you mean
what
just
I
like unchanged dinosaurs?
Dinosaurs alive. It cannot be that. That's why the new Skull Island movie didn't even want to do dinosaurs. They wanted to do monsters.
Its own thing, yeah.
Kaiju.
Because that was such a huge
No, they
trope
want-
at the time. You know, you had the Lost World, you had the Land Unknown, you had fucking Journey to the Center of the Earth. Doesn't that have dinosaurs in it also? Like that's a very common.
It depends on the
Which
version.
version?
Right.
Some of them have dinosaurs. Some of them just have weird
Big lizards
people.
with big lizards with horns strapped to their heads.
Yeah. Well, but some of them also have like they have like people who aren't people. You know, like Sleestack type deal going on. You know.
Right.
Uh,
What's the
but,
deal in the original? Isn't that a book also? What's the deal in the book?
Yeah.
version?
That's
Are
a
there dinosaurs
Jules
in the
Verne.
book?
That's a Jules Verne novel.
Right. I might have.
I
That,
believe
'cause
in the
have a-
original novel there are no dinosaurs, and that they find people at the center of the earth, and that they are not human. Like they're like dinosaur people. I think.
Okay. Awesome.
Like, get
Yeah,
a
I enjoy
robo.
it. I think that's again, that's just like the Death Runners are another thing where it's like we didn't just make it's a bunch of dinosaurs and they're scary because they're not regular animals. They are scary because we don't know what we're dealing with, and they're comparable to us in intelligence.
Much better than the Planet of the Apes short story that we read, where Dr. Zaius interacted with the dinosaur man.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's this very fine line that you have to walk when you're doing a King Kong thing. Of if you're going to do Skull Island, you have to make sure it feels like Skull Island. It cannot just be there's dinosaurs and there's pterodactyls and there's not white people. You know, I think that's why a lot of people who love the original King Kong cannot get behind 76 and can't see the positive things about that movie, is because Skull Island is so neutered in that. Yeah, I think that's why a lot of people can't get past
I'm kind of one of those
that.
people. I like the.
I was as a kid. I mean, when I was young, I did not like that movie at all, and that was part of the reason. But as I've grown up, I've learned it is a fantastic use of that character, though, for the time.
Yeah.
And
And
movie
that's
has the worst Skull Island, but it has the best score, the best Kong death, the best looking Kong.
yeah. I mean, that's debatable, but design wise, that's my favorite too. That and the new Skull Island Kong.
Yeah, I
They're my.
really
They're,
love that.
That's what.
Or best looking
I really love new Skull Island Kong.
best looking practical Kong, I guess I should say. It's not really fair to compare it to, you know.
Then again,
modern.
when you've got Toho, the two Toho Kongs, that's not much competition there.
Well, no, but you're also comparing it to fucking, you know, the original and
33 is weird though when you talk about Kong's design because it changes from scene to scene.
Yeah.
Where it's like I have a favorite Kong in that movie, like it's the second one. I don't love the first puppet in the third one that dies at the end.
You don't like the large full scale animatronic Kong with Bill?
I actually do like that because that's so ambitious for the time too.
Yeah.
I mean, like it's crazy that somebody even thought to do that. For
I really
the
wish
close.
Peter Jackson had done a practical
Ooh,
Kong.
yeah.
I mean,
They
even
were
if all-
gonna.
I mean, the
They would have
technology
just
was
wanted to
there.
do-
They used to have a giant life-size Kong animatronic until it burned down at Universal Studios.
Even
I
if
mean-
they still wanted to do the same design where he's basically just a big gorilla, which I don't like. I'm always more of a Kong as, you know, upright standing kind of guy. But if
That's
they just
another
want
thing.
to, but if they just want to make him,
That's
but if
another
they
thing.
just want to
I
make
feel
him a
like
big
about this.
gorilla, if they just want to make him a big gorilla, it still would have looked better practical. Mighty Joe Young existed 7 years before that. Why does Mighty Joe Young look so much better than Peter Jackson's Kong? So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you about the design of Kong in that movie being boring. And that's why I think I love this so much, because this is the first thing that really makes it clear he is his own species. Like Vincent Denham is very clear about that. Like if Kong, you know, everybody always said Kong was a gorilla. That can't be true. You know, I love all that stuff.
He's the 33 design. He's upright. He's got those big tusks. He's got those weird like Neanderthal
Brows.
Yeah, he's his own.
I love the way Joe DeVito draws Kong. I mean, that's if
it feels like a nice
his weird little like
approximation.
peanut-shaped head.
Yeah. I like his
which
illustrations.
don't you guys love they kept that for the new Skull Island, like that
Yeah.
little head? I love that they kept the little head.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, as we've been saying, this is one of my favorite things. I wish we had this. I wish we had something like this for Gojira. I still hold out hope maybe for one day. It would obviously be a lot different, but I just mean like it's something that feels like the Star Wars expanded universe equivalent of a giant monster thing.
But it seems like Toho is
just
very hesitant on giving Godzilla any sort of origin story for the time being, at least from what we've seen so far and from what Chris
Doesn't even have
Mowry
to be
told
an
us all
origin
those
story,
years
though.
ago.
It doesn't even have to be an origin story though. Just give me some fucking
Here
literature.
we go. Godzilla, King of Monster Island.
They could do. I mean, there's so many different things they could do. There's so many periods in the Showa series that could just be picked out and just
Like
write something that fills in some holes.
Oh yeah, I remember
Like what
you
Fox started
gave me like this
doing-
amazing
what-
pitch, Bill, and like I wish people did that.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about it on this.
No,
but yeah,
no.
my idea for continuing the Showa series is very specific, and Toho would never let me do it.
Same thing that Fox started doing in recent years with Planet of the Apes. For those of you listening who maybe don't know and haven't heard the stuff that me and Bill did over on his channel about it, there's like low-key like a whole Planet of the Apes extended novel universe that exists now, and you should go check it out because it's so far very good. There's one that I haven't read yet that actually should be coming in the mail very soon.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we have that for Apes now. And I'm glad that Kong has it because
it's such an easy way, and I hope that Disney continues to do it now that they've acquired Fox. It's such an easy way to satiate the fan base. You don't have to sink millions of dollars into it like you do making a movie.
Yeah,
and,
big time.
And the results are usually pretty good. So
But nobody
That's why I was
reads these
so
days,
excited.
Dylan.
That's why I was so excited
Nerds.
when they announced the comic, though, the Kong of Skull Island comic. I was like, oh, good, they're going to continue the original Skull Island world in the medium where it's probably best served. So I definitely want to go back and get into that at some point.
Yeah, it's a shame that this never got made into a movie, but I would totally be open to see some sort of adaptation in the future. That's hopefully not the comic from a couple years ago, a decade ago, I think.
I'd love to revisit this universe like years later again, do another time jump. What does the Joe DeVito version of 1976 look like on Skull Island?
Yeah, I definitely would love a sequel to this. We've never gotten one. I think it lends itself to that at the end. Obviously, I think it was intended, but we've just never gotten one.
The problem with doing
which is a shame.
the problem with doing that though is that at that point you'd have an entire Kong book with no Kong because he would be long dead.
Unless they cloned him.
Oh God! Unless they did a Son of Kong for the sequel, they do Joe DeVito's Son of Kong.
You know what they should have done?
Son of Kong, Prince of Skull Island. There we go.
You know what they should have done in this book? They should have had when they first meet Kong, he's like a juvenile. They should have had him have white fur, like Kong.
That would have been cool.
And then explain that the Kongs start out with white fur and it just gets darker as they age, and that would have made everything make so much more sense in retrospect.
Oh my God, you're right. Fun. Yeah. But anyways.
And given the mom red hair and explain that the females have red hair and big titties, and that would have made King Kong make more sense.
I did really enjoy. There was this moment where Ashira like so sure that the Kong she's looking at is a female. Oh, by the way, that's something we didn't. I know, Andres, you want to wrap this up. Yeah. This is getting long. One last thing. Did you guys mind that was the name of their species as well as his name, Kong?
Yeah.
Because when I first read this, I was like, oh, that's the name of the species too?
It makes sense. It's like they're the Kongs, and
it's not like it's
King
a scientific
Kong.
name.
Yeah.
It's not like it's a scientific name, it's what the Islanders call it. It's a little bit more weird for me when they use like proper names for like Triceratops. I'm like, why do they know that's what that's called?
Right, I remember that.
That must be a translation thing though, of like they're calling it something else, but just for our sake, they're not,
Right,
true. Just so we know what they're talking about, but then they don't.
But they don't call the T-Rexes T-Rex.
No, I know, I agree with you. Yeah, it's inconsistent.
And
100%.
they don't call the sauropods. They call them long necks.
Right, and that weird sauropod from that one painting of Joe DeVito's, the one with the elephant trunk, it's nowhere to be found in the book unless I completely zoned out on that part.
Same here.
Well, no, yeah, he does. No, that's the part where it attacks Kong. He remember he's going.
I don't remember that. Maybe
Yeah, he
that's
gets
another
attacked by a big
part I zoned
sauropod.
Oh, I remember a crocodilian at some point. I don't remember the big sauropod.
That's the same part. Kong is about to get attacked by the big crocodilian, and then right before it attacks him, the big sauropod comes out of nowhere and kills it, and then Kong has to get away from the big sauropod.
Okay.
So I talked about it earlier too. I love that part because it goes out of its way to like show it's definitely not the same creature from 33 that attacks that raft, but it shows that like that swamp is full of them, you know, and full of these angry hippo-like sauropods. I really like that we've gone out of our way to make that attack from 33 like more of a hippo type thing. In recent years, like perceiving it that way, especially in the original novelization, it feels that way.
Yeah, because in 33 it just looks like it eats that guy, and you're like that.
Yeah, it looks that way in the movie, but earlier when you see it throwing people around with its mouth, it's not swallowing them. So I don't think it ate that guy in that one part. I think it just killed him.
It might have just been chewing him to death.
I think that's all it was. I think it got him out of the tree. You know, it doesn't have hands. It had no other way to kill him other than with its mouth.
Get out of my property!
And the way it's explained in the book is that, or the way Kong rationalizes it is like, its young must be nearby. You know, it's like a hippo thing. That's how it's characterized. You know,
there are also recorded incidents of hippos eating meat, even though they're primarily herbivorous. So, you know.
I don't think that's, especially since this is a Skull Island sauropod as well. Like, if it's going to eat meat, I'm not going to question it, you know? Especially since they probably eat fish anyway if they're living in the swamp most of the time. There's all kinds of
they're like a weird mixture of brontosaur and plesiosaur because they spend most of their time, it seems like, in the water, and then occasionally they come out.
And they got the trunks, which was a theory that was passed around for a while in paleontology.
Yeah, that was an early 2000s paleontology theory that has since been like, oh no, that's probably bullshit.
Like, they don't got any muscle. There's no indication.
But again, because it's Skull Island, it's fine, you know.
Yeah,
he gets away with it because it's Skull Island.
Although it's so weird because like whenever people imagine like sauropods with trunks, they imagine them like an elephant just hanging over their snout, not like just sticking out of their forehead like it is here.
Hold
on, I'm flipping to that page just so I can see it again.
It could be that the sauropod is simply raising the trunk up like an elephant.
That's because it's supposed to be scaring Kong in that scene. It's supposed to be like intimidating him. Hold on, I'm trying to find it.
It's supposed to be like attached.
It's really hard to find.
Right, in the book.
Oh, it's after Kong escapes the village. Right. My bad.
In this book, do we ever see one of those big serpents like he fought in 33? The one with the little arms, you know? You remember when he fought Manda randomly in 33?
I don't remember reading any serpents like that, even though Joe DeVito really likes drawing that scene, apparently, for the comic covers.
So yes, that scene with the crocodilian you're thinking of, that is the scene where the sauropod attacks. And yes, Andres, the sauropod is rearing up like a horse. And so the trunk is doing the same thing. So it's not like it's just sticking out of the top of its head. It's just like reared up.
It's like when you see an elephant do that, when they raise their trunks up and roar or whatever.
Exactly. What was the other thing I was going to say? The snake you were asking about.
Yeah, did it ever happen?
It does have a cameo. I just don't remember exactly where it was.
I was hoping we'd get some spider pit in this book because, you know, we didn't get the spider pit in the original movie. It seemed like a good chance to throw that in there.
Well, again, that's in the novel. That's in the novelization, though. So technically, that did happen with this.
Yeah, I know, but we still could have had some big spiders or something.
All right. So you know what? Why don't we just get into this then? Since we talked. I think. Is there anything else you guys want to say about the actual story?
No.
All right. No. So let me just finish it out then with what I wanted to do at the end. So. I'm going to give you guys a little taste of the part of the book you had no access to.
Okay.
And then we can wrap up here. So these are the pages from the sketchbook of Carl Denham. This is like a bunch of stuff that didn't fit into the story that Joe DeVito wanted to throw in there. So, you know, a lot of it is kind of just like nice ancillary world building stuff. Like there's these primate-esque dinosaurs that I mentioned to you guys earlier that people keep as pets that are just kind of like nice, different. Again, it's like they're not all voracious killers, you know, like some of them are just kind of like these nice creatures that people keep as pets. And it makes the world feel more real. There are plants that can move on their own, apparently on Skull Island. The root systems are so evolved that they can actually function as like basic legs, and they actually travel from place to place and actively hunt. That's wild. And I'm like, that sounds very
Mothra.
It's fucking terrifying is what it is. You should see the picture. It's like a big pineapple, but with like legs. It's creepy.
That's what I want Joe DeVito to write. Write a Mothra book. Explain Infant Island to me, Joe.
You guys
Mothra,
would also,
Queen of Infant Island.
I would recommend you guys to look up the way the old city looks, because it's so fucking interesting. It's because what he had to do was explain why we don't see it in the movie. You know, like why we don't just see the ruins as Kong and they're traveling through the island. And it's because it's built into the forest. Like the old people, they didn't build buildings out of like rock and stone. They grew them. Like they actually managed to control photosynthesis and designed root systems to function almost like electrical lines and develop their civilization that way and built it right into the ground. It's really cool. Maybe I'll send you guys I did send you guys a picture of something earlier. I don't know if you guys got it.
This is not Kong related, but this is a picture I found that Joe DeVito painted of Batman riding a giant bat. It's pretty metal.
Oh, did you guys get that picture of old Carl Denham I sent you earlier?
Yeah, I got it.
So yeah, definitely attempt to draw like an elderly Robert Armstrong there. So let me take a picture of what the island architecture looks like, just so you guys can get a sense of it. So yeah, it's like grown into the ground. So there's stuff like that. Mm-hmm. There's a picture of what the doors look like after Kong has destroyed it, and you just see that they're totally fucking wrecked and that they're unusable. Mm-hmm. This is my favorite page. I might send you guys this, or you know what? I'm not going to send it to you. I'm going to read you the passage from this page, because it's just, this is like a little storytelling moment that just, again, it gives you a sense of what Carl Denham was doing in the 20 years since his return to Skull Island and staying there. Mm-hmm. And it makes Skull Island feel so much scarier without even like showing us anything. So first of all, he shows us what the Death Runners' skulls look like, and you can see how gigantic the craniums are. And that's just kind of alarming in and of itself. Like they essentially look like human skulls, but with dinosaur fronts and human backs. It's really creepy. And then you have apparently Denham found this fossil. So it's like there are fossils on Skull Island, which is weird to think about, but like there are actual fossils there. And he finds this dead human skeleton interconnected with this dinosaur, and he doesn't figure out what he's looking at until he finds this shield buried in the ground, and he realizes, oh shit, some Greek or Roman soldiers crashed here fucking thousands of years ago and fought some dinosaurs. Can you imagine what that was like?
That would have been amazing. That'd been like metal as fuck.
Okay, that's the prequel. That's the prequel I want now.
So there's that with the, so I'm just gonna read you guys this little passage here. This will just give you a nice little taste of Denham in his twilight years. I did not believe the storyteller when she first told me of creatures called Death Runners, but I cannot deny my own eyes. The brain of this creature was at least the size of a chimp. I have used its razor-sharp teeth to shave. The legends say they were almost as smart as humans and possibly could even talk. That they were deadly is without question, as this extraordinary find shows. From what age was this unfortunate warrior? Greek, Roman? It seems others have been here before. This island contains mystery upon mystery and unimagined dangers. So then this is the part that really gets me. So he draws this big spider monster that they found one day, right? And it's essentially you guys know the picture of the spider from the Spider Pit sequence that floats around online, yeah. You know, like the one image that survived from it. So that's what the creature is. That's what's being like fleshed out here. But apparently it's not a spider per se, and that's what freaks me out. So listen to this. The spider-like creature I've drawn below, which is partly covered with fur and feeds its young with milk, was caught today after killing several villagers. It has 2 huge eyes, legs with fleshy muscles on the outside, and it has hands to go with its massive fangs. Is it arachnid or mammal? I must endeavor to do further research if only I had a camera. Oh, Carl Denham. And there's a little more information about the not spider here. Oh, you guys should see what this thing looks like. It's fucking terrifying. This creature can turn its head, which is something spiders cannot do.
Right.
And is supposedly fast enough to run down a man with ease. It grabs with its hands, quote unquote, and injects massive amounts of venom, causing painful death. So far as I know, it spins no web and rarely travels beyond deep ravines. So yeah, it's supposed to be the creature from the spider pit sequence.
Yeah.
But the idea here is that it creepily might not be a spider, but a mammal that has evolved to fill the same niche. How fucking scary is that?
Oh boy, yeah, and spiders are scary enough as it is. To know that one is mammalian just makes it even freakier.
Yeah, so there's different ways you can interpret it. It could be a mammal that has evolved into a spider-like creature, or a spider that has evolved into a mammal-like creature. That's, ugh, I don't like it. Oh well, I do like it, but it freaks me out. Two more, and then I think I'll let you guys. I'll let Andres wrap this up. So there's one here which is this big salamander crocodile thing that Denham describes, and I really like this part because he describes how he both found out about it, and you guys know those mosaics that Jack Driscoll finds underground earlier in the book.
Yeah.
Like those images that are showing him the history of the island.
Right.
So Denham actually found out how they made those. Apparently, there's this species of squid, like these tiny squids on the island, that when you crush them, their blood makes a certain kind of color, and you get a different color depending on how you kill them or whatever. And that's how they made them. And it's like it's like a technological but also primitive kind of thing. I love it. And this big salamander crocodile thing, it's also kind of like a whale because it's evolved like no back legs. It's just like it's 2 front legs and a tail. Very creepy looking. And it's creepy the way it's described because Denham was finding out about the squids, and all of a sudden he turned around and this thing was just there with a guy in its mouth. And I'm like, that's classic Skull Island. All right, one more creature. So here we have. So I'm just going to read this because I can't do this justice. This creature is called a jaglig or glutton. He's well named. I've seen one of these kill and swallow a small dinosaur almost its own size, that being about 80 pounds. These super frogs have been known to chase down a full-grown man. That's a common theme with Skull Island animals, I see. Their bodies generally are green and black and are covered with viscous slime that I find particularly repugnant. Yet the native who is brave enough to capture one is greatly celebrated because its flesh is found interestingly. Wait. Oh well, they like to eat the skin. That's the idea. So it also seems. So the other idea of this little passage here. So you've got these predatory frogs on the island. I'm going to take a picture of this, send it to you guys. And I recommend that you listening to this at home, look it up online. Just look up Joe DeVito Kong super frogs or whatever, and you'll see it. They're essentially like these wolf frogs. It's terrifying. And so the idea that Denham is getting into at the end of this passage is that after Baratu was killed by Kong, other people started to go beyond the wall and to hunt some of the animals that live out there. And it's better for the villagers. They're getting better and more food, and their worldview is kind of expanding because they're not as afraid of the creatures behind the wall anymore. Although Kong being dead probably helps that. There's just so many cool little details in here about how some of the houses that Denham found, the architecture is inspired by dinosaurs. Like there's a Stegosaurus-looking house and a Triceratops-looking house. He finds this primitive glider that the Tagatu made in like remote times, like this Da Vinci-esque glider made out of pterodactyl wings, which is really interesting. There's just all kinds of cool stuff. Oh, all right. All right. I'm sorry. Two more quick creatures here. One real fast. There's this dinosaur on the island that has basically evolved to constantly be playing dead, like to the point where it has like wounds grown into its body that are always bleeding and always gaping. So that way it looks like it's just been killed, like it's been freshly killed by something. And then when scavengers come to feed on it, it feeds on the scavengers. How brilliant is that? Then there's just this one Islander here who Carl like hangs out with, who becomes like his buddy. Aside the storyteller, he calls him Newton, apparently because he's like a great thinker amongst the Islanders, and he's trying to get them to like go back to a more enlightened time. All right, so this will be the last thing I mention. I'm going to read this again verbatim because I can't do it justice with just telling you guys. There are old writings that suggest there was once a Kong-like reptilian biped on this island. They have not been seen since the Kongs became feral. It seems there was a competition for survival and the Kongs won. I was shocked when this infant, already 5 feet tall, and he's drawn what it looks like off to the left, was discovered and captured. Could this be a true Malpaku? That's what the creatures are referred to, I guess, in the island. Yeah, in the island's lore. Newton expressed concern as it was brought back to the wall, meaning they released it after they captured it, so that way it could like go off and grow. He says the doors no longer pose a true barrier to an attack by such a creature if fully grown. So the implication there is that yes, Kong is dead. Yes, a lot of the big dinosaurs on the island are dead, but that there might be a little seed of a king left on Skull Island. That blew my mind. That like there was
reptilian, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna send you guys a picture, Dylan. It's a very Imboon looking thing. It's very cool looking. It's essentially like a, we were talking about how the Death Runners are kind of like primate-esque dinosaurs, but this even more so. It's like a dinosaur gorilla basically. Very cool looking.
Very cool. Very cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
Very much so. All right, so that's all I'll say then. There's so much. Again, get the print version of this book. It's so worth it. The audiobook is fine. The print version is a revelation.
Right.
And that's the last thing I'll say.
And I will fully endorse Kong, King of Skull Island in either form. Please check it out if you haven't done so already. And while you're at it, go check out the Kong of Skull Island and King Kong of Skull Island. I haven't seen either of those, but from what Bill tells me, it looks really cool. And plus, it's more Joe DeVito art, so who wouldn't want to see more of that? Unless you're one of those people, in which case I will silently judge you for that. Anyways,
Joe DeVito didn't do the art for all the comics. He just does a lot of the covers, but the art in the comics is still really good. Right. So that's
King Kong of Skull Island is all just his art.
Is all him, yeah.
Yeah, all Joe.
And this book and this book is all him too.
Yes, and other people, but mostly him.
Mostly him, yeah.
Mostly. Anyway, so let's see. Any last words from either of you guys about Kong, King of Skull Island, the novel?
I think I've said enough.
I think we've covered it.
All right, then. So, Dylan, since the next episode will be focused on you, what will you be recommending us to check out next time?
Yes, well, we're going to segue into a bit of a comedy next time from an early work from the great Mel Brooks. We're going to look at the original film version of The Producers.
Nice! I've been meaning to check that out for a while. And Bill, thank you so much for joining us and for just talking about King Kong, just like the good old days.
Thanks for giving me a venue to finally talk about this book. I meant to review this for a long time, and now I finally got to do it, and I don't have to edit the video.
Yes. Instead, thank you for giving me 2.5 fucking hours to deal with myself.
You're welcome.
I'm just.
There's some dead air in there you can tighten up. It'll be more like 2 by the time you get done with it.
But thank you very much, Bill. It's been great, just to do all this again. And thank you.
I'm sorry it was so long, but I had a lot to say.
I knew that, and I knew this why. If you had to recommend anything, I knew it had to be Kong related. So thank you very much, everybody, for sticking around. Please check out the other videos in this fully endorsed series, and check out some more videos that I have in the. I have cooking on the back burner, and featuring Dylan and Bill as we check out some weird comics. Maybe check out a weird movie or so in the future. Who knows?
If you're interested in more Kong stuff, you can go over to Bill's channel and
absolutely
check out the commentaries that we did a couple years ago.
We covered every Kong movie. There's not one that we haven't covered.
Absolutely. And by the way, I'll give a shout out to my buddy D-Man1954. He reviewed every Kong movie inspired by Bill's Godzilla and Gamma-Paloozas. Check those out as well if you want to know what he thinks of King Kong. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you guys next time. I have been Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir.
I've been Super GM64.
And I've been Bill Worcester, aka Zazubaar, back from the grave.
And until next time, everybody, the science is sound. And ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly the way it's been.
Onikana. Can never get that chant.
What is that supposed to reference?
That's like the chant from like 33. I like the chant that they do for Kong. I could never get the exact
I can only remember the da 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 from.
That's King Kong versus Godzilla.
That's why it's the only one I remember.